talk about some issues that I think are absolutely essential to the community. So I would love to get a warm welcome from the chat for somebody who was very, very anxious about coming on to talk about this, given the massive amount of harassment that we both have been receiving from the groups that we're about to talk about today. So with that in mind, hard ground rules that we have set for this stream. We've got multiple mods in chat. Discussion is fine. There are probably Folkists in the audience and members of the YSCE people who would claim that they are not, but spout Folkist rhetoric, etc. If you are polite, and we'll be going over a polite comment from in my comment section on one of my videos from somebody like this. If you are polite, you can have a discussion with my community. Community, please be on your best behavior. However, if you spout any sort of obscenities, if you are cruel to my guest here, if you are cruel to my audience, if you use homophobic or transphobic rhetoric, if you use exclusionary rhetoric, that is not discussion, that is abuse. My mods will come down on you without mercy. Just so you know. Also, apologies for the slight echo on Chelydoreus' end. I'm hoping that he'll be able to work on it, maybe turn the speaker down a little bit or something, but I am hearing it on my end. I don't know if you guys are hearing it on yours. Before we start the show, I would like to talk about some of the things that are coming up for the channel. Everybody knows Thursday is Thanksgiving. I'm going to be doing something a little bit different this year because I normally do a Thanksgiving sort of historical rant, and this year I decided I want to do something a little more positive, so stick around for the end of the stream for that. Also, I announced at the end of my last stream, for those who missed it, a Hellenic Common Hellenism calendar project that I've teamed up with an artist friend to work on. We are almost a quarter of the way done with it, and the Kickstarter should be up when we hit about halfway done. That way we can raise money for the initial printing. The calendars will be about $50 to be able to pay my artist friend a fair amount for their artwork. The PDF versions will be $35 for the same reason. The Kickstarter should be up soon. It'll be in the description of the videos that come out once it starts. I have posted an announcement in the announcements channel of my Discord trying to gauge folks that are interested. If you haven't seen that and you are interested potentially in pre-ordering, please go react to that announcement if you're a member of the Discord. If you're not, the link is in the description below. But I wanted to get all of that out of the way at the beginning of this discussion because this is a doozy and it's probably going to be one of the full-length 2-hour discussions because we have so much to go over. So with that out of the way, let's give a warm welcome to Chelydoreus and go ahead and give us an introduction because your work is incredible and I'm really, really excited to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you, first of all, so much for having me for this discussion. I hope the echo you mentioned isn't continuing because I can't hear anything on my end that is wrong.
Yeah, it's mostly I can hear an echo of my own voice. You've turned it down. I don't hear it anymore.
Okay. So I'm Chelydoreus. I'm in Athens, Greece. I've been a polytheist and practitioner of magic for the last 16 years and counting. I'm a devotee of Hecate and other gods who aren't Hellenic.
Yeah, you're a syncretist, aren't you? Like primarily with your practice?
Absolutely. I completely support and believe in syncretism, and I try to keep my practices as separate as possible for a single person, but obviously there's going to be overlap and there are, things spilling over from one practice to another. I have my own system of practice I have designed for years now with guidance from the gods as they see fit. And to that end, I'm also working on a project that was funded from the Center for Global Polytheism and Indigenous Traditions of the Indic Academy.
Run by the esteemed Edward Butler, who he invited us both to a conference fairly recently to talk about the future of polytheist traditions.
Exactly. Dr. Butler's work is invaluable, really. And
he is one of the very few polytheist philosophers to advance a polycentric view of Platonism, which although I'm not a Platonist, I can appreciate the value of that for those who are.
Exactly. And plurality and polycentricity is central to the way I see things as well, even though, as you, I'm not a Platonist. my work is on the formation of a new mystery tradition or mystery cult, in the way the word cult is understood in academic and religious circles, not in the way we mean it negatively. The idea is not a reconstruction or an actual revival in the sense of a ancient existing tradition that is brought over to our day, but rather a new modern tradition rooted on ancient information and ancient guidance, but divinely inspired and with a very strong focus of dealing with modern matters for modern practitioners.
So very similar to the revivalist work, but going a little bit further,
Yes,
specifically
further.
creating your own practices. And you said that it will be a mystery tradition, which means it's initiatory, but you've also talked about how you plan on publishing work so that anybody who wants to go through the initiation process can, if they find that it fits for them.
Yeah, actually, that was one of my biggest problems early on, because I'm a big supporter and I fully see the value in initiatory traditions and closed practices. But I also knew that there is no real way for me to do that while in Greece, when most of the people, most of the audience and the people that are interested in my work is international. So it doesn't actually have an initiatory element the way we would understand it from the Eleusinian mysteries, for example, or modern initiatory traditions like Wicca. But it does have the concept of induction, taking here a term from some blocks of digital Ambler vocabulary, meaning that the initiatory aspect is the spirits, the gods in this case, inducting us into their mysteries. That's why the basic work for this tradition will be in the form of a book, so anyone can have access to study it, put it into practice, and hopefully also come to experience and be inducted into these mysteries. And my
Well,
goal is to have it be a pluralistic thing, not as a high priest who has absolute authority, but someone who
a
contributed
guide.
something. Yeah, I
Yeah,
wish to have it.
and we'll get deeper into that work probably toward the end of the stream. But there was a phrase that you and I sort of discussed in some of our sort of pre-interview discussions, that you hope that it will be open to anyone, but it might not be for everyone, which is very much how I see common Hellenism and the revived traditions that I've been working on.
Exactly.
So while we're on that topic, you mentioned that you've received backlash, for a polite way to put it, for your work in Greece. Let's start a little bit with why I guess you've kind of separated yourself from the Hellenic polytheist community in your own country, the experiences that you had when you were younger, because part of the reason we met was when you went public with some experiences you had with the founder of the YSEE, Vlasis Rasias.
Yeah. Well, that's a colorful past. Well, I've been active, as I said, personally in my practice and my beliefs for 16 years now, specifically since 2005, when I first performed the first intentional, ritual to the Hellenic gods, a name-giving ritual that I actually used basically as was from YSC's website, because they had a name-giving ritual as an example. That was before I had much of an interaction with them, very shortly before. And
give me 1 second. This is a live interview. There isn't really a way to do captions.
unfortunately.
Okay, go ahead and continue.
Thank you. Because at that point, 16 years ago, the only actual source for anything polytheistic in Greece was the YSCE, because of their long history. Exactly because I felt like that was my only source of information, besides what little I could find through the international internet sources. I
Much like I
tried.
kind of felt with the particular Folkist blogs that I first ran across when I first was introduced to
Yeah,
Hellenism after Athena called me.
yeah, it was a lot like that, because I was 15 years old. I was trying to find out what actually what did the ancients believed, and if such a thing can happen and still occur today. Because the way Greek education is structured, we barely, if at all, learn anything about non-Christian religions and traditions until much later on. And
Well, there's this
my
prevalent view across the world that these indigenous traditions largely died because, like insert Christian justification here, the gods weren't real, they were actually demons, the Christian God conquered everything, et cetera, et cetera. There was this idea, like when I was growing up, I longed for that sort of experience, but I thought the closest I could get would be things like Wicca or other occult practices because those ancient traditions, there was nobody reviving them. It was a shock when I discovered that there were revivalist communities that exist at all.
It was the same for me, and in fact, I came into neo-paganism, Wicca, and Wicca adjacent traditions and beliefs around the same time. But the very first ones I came across were the Hellenic polytheist ones, because those are the ones I was most familiar with due to my heritage, but and my experience. But actually, it happened almost concurrently, like probably only a few months difference between finding one and then the next. The problem is exactly because around that age, when I was 15, I was already very conscious of the fact that I was gay. I was very fine with that myself.
There's a lot of anti-LGBT discrimination in Greece, even to this day.
Yes, and back then it was far more widespread than it is now. There was even the civil union, the only kind of official recognition we have in terms of common rights and marriage is very recent, like only a few years ago. And we're talking over almost 2 decades now. The problem I had was, even though I was very aware of myself and very I've never had much of a problem in the sense of knowing who I am and where I belong and what matters to me, which is possibly what saved me in many cases. I was still a 15-year-old kid with no guidance spiritually. I didn't have any mentors or other people. I was the only kid besides a Muslim girl from Albania in my school, which was a public school in downtown Athens. So you can see that even in what can be understood as what should be a multicultural context, that didn't exist. So I had no exposure and no way to compare and contrast spiritual and religious matters. My only access was to Christian Orthodox traditions, and I was very aware that I was a polytheist and I didn't want to be a part of the church. YSE was my first source, like I mentioned. Excuse me.
Which makes a lot of sense because they're kind of prominent in Greece as one of the sort of fronting organizations for that. Them and Labris.
Yeah, and back then, we're talking 2004, 2005, the internet was still very much a luxury in Greece. I was one of the very few, actually, students at my school who had private internet access and not had to use like a library or something. And the problem is, the Greek internet at the time was bare bones. YSE was literally the only thing I could find. Labris wasn't even active online yet, and if they even existed at all, actually.
Yeah, I know they came a little
exactly
while after the YSEE because some of the members didn't like the direction that the YSEE started to take.
Exactly, yeah.
Wasn't it after their first denial of by the Greek government of recognition that sort of Labris started? I might be wrong on my timeline on that, so don't take me on my.
It has to be earlier because the first official rejection was in 2015.
Okay. So yeah, Labris started earlier than that, but I know that a lot of their leadership had problems with the direction that the YSEE was going because even though, and we'll get into this later, even though they officially denounce things like the Golden Dawn and nationalist rhetoric, they tend to, in practice, spout much of the same rhetoric, and there's a lot of anti-Semitism in their theology work, among other things.
Exactly, and a lot of vocabulary and ideas that correspond to very problematic and fascist ideologies, even though they speak about the opposite. It's we will get into the details.
Dog whistles are complicated, especially when they're international.
Exactly. That's another problem, that a lot of Greeks aren't aware of a lot of international dog whistles and issues. So what passes as normal vocabulary here might actually be very deeply problematic in other countries.
So let's get back to your experience with Rusius. You began corresponding with him when you were in your teens, correct?
Yeah, I actually emailed YSC back then because they had a contact form, and I didn't know anyone else that I could turn to, and I had a lot of I already didn't like the way their FAQ was, because it was much smaller than it is now. It was far more it wasn't as developed yet, and I did like the way they brought Christian discrimination and the history of Christianity towards polytheism, which it's completely unknown in Greece, at least at that time. It's more widespread now. So that won me over at first, but then the rhetoric that everyone can worship these gods, the Hellenic gods, but they're ours first, and everyone else is welcome to them. But if they pass through us, or if they give up what was theirs, and that it's best. I remember very specifically that, I don't know if the FAQ still words things this way, but they used to say, because there was like a question, what if I'm from North, Scandinavian countries, or the US, or the British Isles? And there was this answer that it's best for you to go to your ancestral traditions and not ours. And
well,
that was
in the
problem.
AFA and heathenry, that term is drink from your own well. Go to your own well first, which is a Folkist dog whistle that's near universal among Folkist groups.
Yeah, but I wasn't aware of all that. I had no contact to. I still don't have contact to heathen communities and ideas, because I've never been drawn to heathenry. The problem is that also wasn't.
To answer your question, I'm looking at their fact now. And again, it's worded in a very dog whistly way. It says ethnic religions refer to specific nations, and that is why they do not partake in proselytizing. Just like in ancient times, however, they accept people from other nations who freely decide to let go of their own ethnic religion and adopt the religion of a different nation.
Yeah, very dog whistly.
So that is a implied drink from your own well first.
Exactly. And I remember I contacted, because I obviously,
for anyone curious, by the way, of where I just read that off from, I'm linking it in the live chat.
I freely admit that it's been a very long time, so I only remember very specific interactions with me and Rusias, exactly because they were the ones that affected me the most. I sadly do not have that email account any longer. It doesn't even exist as a service, I think, at all anymore. And at first, I was very impressed with him, because understandably, back then, he was the only one as a leader of YSE, and while the organization was still quite small back then, he was in charge of the communication and contact for the group. So I was actually talking with the founder, and I remember because he was always putting his signature at the end of its email, like Vlasis Rasias. And he was very professional and very kind at first. I remember I was actually very impressed, because I was expecting a sort of, fraudulent guru kind of idea, because that was my only other exposure to alternative religious beliefs. And he was very professional. I immediately told him my age, and he was very good about that okay, it's great that you're interested, but as a minor, you should get your parents' permission before you do anything, like want to meet people or anything like that. And then after a while, I remember we didn't exchange too many emails. I just asked, what is the YSC's and Hellenic polytheism's idea? He didn't like that I used the word, I didn't say Hellenism or ethnic religion or something like that, because that even back then, though the term ethnic religion still rubbed me the wrong way. And when I asked what is the opinion of this Hellenic polytheist religion on homosexuality and magic, because that was the time when I was starting to get into magic, witchcraft, Wicca, and the neo-pagan part of my practices.
Well, of course, that's a lot of what was available back then. This is almost 20 years ago, right?
Exactly. And I mean, I think it's most people's entry point to polytheism and paganism. And he immediately changed his behavior and his attitude.
Quick thing, there will be answered questions throughout the stream. If your question is on topic for what we're currently discussing, then we will answer throughout the stream. I'll pop things up. However, there are some topics that I might say post in the chat and let you guys know we're going to be covering that later. So there will be Q&A just throughout the stream. If you have a question about what we're talking about right now, post it. And if it isn't answered by whatever it is we happen to be saying at the time, I'll pop it up when Chelydoreus or I is finished with whatever we're saying at the time.
And I'm always happy to be contacted afterwards on social media. I'm open to questions and discussion at any time.
Yeah, his link tree is in the description, guys. That's all of the different places that you could find him. The page Hellenismos is run by somebody that is a big fan of the YSE. They claim that they are not a part of it, but it is run by somebody who is a large fan, because the Hellenismos TV YouTube channel is frequently reposted there, and it has a lot of Rusius's speeches and such on it. So, what happened when you brought that up? Because this is one of the big reasons that you and I first met.
Well, at first I hadn't asked directly about myself. I hadn't disclosed anything that I was gay and practicing and interested in magic, but I wanted to see the general the general attitude and belief about it. He was very negative, for lack of a better word. He immediately told me that while homosexuality is a personal matter, it's not about them to. It's not the religion's position to talk about that, but there is definitely absolutely no concept of getting married religiously by Hellenic polytheist traditions, because in their belief, supposedly in any Hellenic belief, only a man and a woman can actually get married, because Zeus and Hera are the gods of marriage, and they are man and woman in their opinion. But the problem is, it wasn't even worded as this is simply what we believe. It was worded as fact that if we were, I actually remember him telling me, if we were to marry two men or two women, we would be we would be sorry, I'm trying to find the right verb. It would be blasphemous and miasmic towards the gods, because we would be violating the actual belief that has to be a man and a woman.
And for the record, in the live stream that I did on the YSEE, they still hold a similar stance. They don't outright condemn LGBTQ existence, but they still refuse to marry LGBTQ couples, both trans and, if the marriage involves a trans person, they refuse to answer the question. If it's two men or two women, they state now their position is that, well, nobody really cares what they do in the comfort of their own homes, but our marriage ceremony has very specific, keep in mind, this is their marriage ceremony that they wrote. I'm going to remind my audience of this. Our marriage ceremony has very specific symbolism that has to do with reproduction, and those couples are not capable of that, so we will not marry them, which is a cop-out if ever I've heard one.
Yeah, and it's a cop-out. A small comment here. This is a very common cultural and social cop-out for Greeks who oppose, well, some degree of, LGBTQ people and lives. They will
And
not
I'm going-
outright say, yeah.
And I'm also going to stress that these answers were provided by the American branch of the YSCE, because there is a YSCE of America. And these answers that I just recited, which if you guys want to see the screenshots of those, go check out the live stream I did with Surus on the YSCE, because we had them on that and it was displayed on screen. Those answers were provided from the leader of the YSCE America Facebook group, meaning that this is the American branch. They don't have the sort of legal get outs that being in Greece provided the YSCE with for a very long time, because gay marriage was illegal in Greece until very recently.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I mean, let's face it, you don't need to be kind to somebody who called you living miasma. Like, it's pretty clear that the founder of the YSCE was straight up homophobic.
That happened immediately afterwards, because I was really pissed off reading that. He continued. That was just his comment on homosexuality. I also asked, what about magic? And then it was when he actually went rabid and he was like, magic is an affront to the gods. It's completely a hubristic belief and practice. Anyone who practices magic is in living hubris and living miasma against the gods. And I replied, well, I am gay and I practice magic. What about that? Because I'm Greek. You know, even if you want to avoid it by saying, oh, you're a foreigner, I am actually Greek. And I remember that his only actual reply was, well, then the way you live your life is, I think he used the word lifestyle or something, is an affront to the gods. You are living miasma. You are walking, breathing hubris with every word you utter, because I practice magic.
You were a teenager.
I was a teenager, and he was well
your
aware
age.
of that.
Yeah.
Yes, and I'm seriously regretful that I haven't kept any kind of evidence for that, because I know a lot of people will say, "Oh, he's making it up," and I don't have evidence, but that was my experience.
Well, given the level of harassment that we've both received from, for lack of a better way to put it, members of and fanboys of the YSCE, you've got absolutely no benefit to coming forward with this apart from sort of putting the truth out there, right? Like, I don't benefit from having this on my channel because I'm going to get a cavalcade of hateful comments at the end of this. I always do. They hate my guts because I'm not ethnically Greek and I talk about Hellenism. Which reminds me, we got a comment, or rather, I got a comment that is the most polite, focused comment I have ever seen. For once, there were, like, dog whistles, yes, but there were no outright just flat insults. Nobody called me a LARPer. So I wanted to give this person, who goes by Odysseus, a little bit, we talked ahead of time about this. This is something you said you wanted to do, a little bit of a spotlight for a moment for this comment that they left for me. And I want to discuss it actively with a Greek person who understands sort of the foundation of a lot of these beliefs and both why they're wrong, but also why they're dog whistles and how to combat them. Because in the spirit of discourse, I'm going to respond live to this comment with you and allow you to kind of explain where some of these ideas come from, because it is a shining example of folkist rhetoric, but it is the least rude folkist rhetoric I have seen. And so since they constantly claim that neither of us will engage with their rhetoric, let's engage with the one person who seems to want to talk to us in any civil manner whatsoever. This seems like fair game to the audience. Let me know. Give me a H if y'all are fair game to kind of go through this comment with Chelydoreus and discuss what's going on. I have the comment is currently posted on Folkist BS. If you don't have access to that part of the server, I'm sorry. It is on my latest video. If you want to scroll down and you click my latest video on politics and Hellenism, if you go down and you click newest first, you should be able to look at it. It's from the person named Odysseus. So looks like that is very H, guys. My audience is extremely game. Okay, so I'm going to start reading it. Stop me when you want to start talking a little bit about what they have to say, okay?
Okay.
Apparently, there's a degree of misunderstanding, miseducation, ignorance, and hubris perhaps going on here. First, looking and judging at the past with today's eyes, especially Hellas and Hellenism, is hubris. Now, I'm going to respond to that briefly.
Yeah, I also have a response to that.
First off, responding to the past with today's eyes is basically all we can do if we're attempting to revive a tradition. It is not hubris to examine potentially faulty beliefs in the past. If anything, like I said in that video, I believe it is spitting in the face of the gods for the gift of reason to not examine past traditions and beliefs in light of current evidence. Prometheus was said to have sacrificed a great deal of torture for us to have access to fire, and Zeus was said to have gifted us with reason. To not apply that to me would be insulting to them, but I'm going to let you go ahead.
I will say that yes, it is a valid criticism to say that we cannot apply certain modern understandings and interpretations on the ancient past, but only when doing history. What we are doing is not studying or recording or interpreting history. We're building and reviving a religion in its many forms. We will have to interpret what we find in that ancient religion and bring it over to modern understandings, ethics, beliefs, and social context. We cannot say, because a classicist will indeed have to study the ancient Greek religion within that context. They will have to see how were the Athenians, how was their social and cultural context structured, what were their social beliefs, the cultural beliefs, how they reacted with one another in order to explain and talk about the religion. But when it comes to modern polytheists, contemporary polytheists, we have to apply our interpretations because we're building a tradition and a religion. We're not doing history.
Well, and even it's important to understand those contexts and things to see how they can apply to the modern day. Like Xenia, for example, it might not necessarily be the healthiest thing to expect that if a hobo knocks on your door that you should take them in and feed them. But, giving somebody who helping them find a shelter might be something that would be helpful if you're not in any danger. Exactly. That sort of things, like ways to extend concepts from ancient Hellenism into the modern day and find ways to expel those that were not.
Exactly.
And I don't think that that's hubris. I think that that's using our God's given gift of reason to further our traditions that they might survive into a modern context.
Indeed. And if I may make a small comment about hubris specifically, hubris is when we assume we know the will of the gods and what the gods say and believe, or what they will do. That was usually hubris even in ancient Greek, not myth, because myth isn't religion. Myth is part of religion, but it's a very surface level part, and it doesn't actually affect the actual practice and belief of the religion. And
the ways in which myth interacts with tradition are myriad and complex, but mythic, I think what you're trying to say is mythic literalism is it's not the same thing in polytheist traditions. Exactly. Where the Christians look at their Bible and that is the foundation of their religion. We don't necessarily have that relationship with our texts. Our texts are a guide, but they are not the end all be all of our traditions.
Precisely. So we cannot be hubristic towards the past or our ancestors or something simply by questioning or changing what they believed and did, because they are not that kind of authority.
All right, so let's continue. We got 2 sentences in. That is a great track record to start. It would seem that there is quite... all right, let's see. Statements such as the Athenians were fascist, racist, misogynistic, etc., all those modern inventions and constructs are out of place in time. I don't think I used the word fascist in my video. I used the word misogynistic and racist to refers to laws in Athens. And from a modern context, there are many racist and misogynistic laws in Athens. And there were ableist beliefs, such as the belief that a child with a birth defect of some kind was a punishment from the gods, where often those infants were killed before they hit 2-3 years old, because that was the belief that they were miasmic just by the virtue of having been born with those problems. We now understand the source of many birth defects. We have no use for that belief anymore.
Exactly.
There are treatments for them, many of them. And many people that are born, like my niece was born without an anal opening. She was able to have surgery and she will live a long and happy, relatively normal life because of it. In ancient Greece, she would have died.
Yeah.
So I wanted to respond to that as well, because I don't think that critiquing these beliefs from that lens, as long as you understand cultural context, is there's nothing wrong with that. We absolutely, as modern people, have a duty to examine those beliefs to see what is worth carrying into the future.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's see. It would seem that there's quite an ignorance about ethnic traditions and by extension ethnic religions, whereby, as evidenced by this video and the erroneous understanding as Hellenism in general, everything is filtered through an Abrahamistic lens, inadvertently, unintentionally, or otherwise. For eons, ethnic traditions and traditions, I think they meant religions and traditions there, sprung through particular cultures and people and were the product of how they were perceived, understood, interpreted the cosmos. Hellenism was and is no different. There was not or is a universalist globalizational aspect to it, nor was it or is a matter of today's flavor, nor a choice between Pepsi or Coke, although it holds universal values, but that is another conversation. Hellenism was and is for the Hellenes.
I have a lot to say about this.
All right, so let's talk a little bit, because when you first reacted to this in my server, you were like, the dog whistles, man, the dog whistles. Like, I could practically see you shaking your fist. Like, without the camera, I could practically hear it.
Yeah, the whole ethnic, this over focusing on ethnic religions, ethnic traditions. The ethnos, meaning the nation in Greek, is what essentially what these people worship, not the gods. That's my sincere personal opinion, because all they talk about is the ethnic, the people. They even call themselves ethniki Hellenists, which means ethnic Greeks. And I will mention some things about this further down.
The YSCE uses that same rhetoric, mind you.
Yeah.
In fact, actually, the YSCE stands for the Greek words of, like, the Supreme Council of Ethnikoi Hellenes. Like, that's what those words in Greek translate to.
Very, humble.
The Supreme Council of Ethnic Greeks.
Yeah. Meanwhile, no one else from any other organization or individual is welcome on that council. Anyway, what I want to say to respond to the actual part of the comment you read is that I don't want to
Alex Cipher, we will get into that when we talk about mystery traditions later. I wanted to make a note on it. I did a whole video on magic in ancient Greece. The answer is complicated, but too long didn't read. High class folks, like upper class, like we're talking upper caste, because there was a caste system in ancient Greece that was determined by wealth and birthright, your genos or your house. If you talk about magic, the wealthiest writers didn't seem to approve of it, but the sheer plethora of katadesmoi or curse tablets that we have recovered showcase that the common people disagreed with them. So we'll talk about that later, but magic is complicated in ancient Greece, and I did an entire video on it, getting far deeper into the scholarship on it, but it wasn't necessarily that it wasn't approved of, it was that the higher classes didn't like it.
And it depends on a lot of things. It's complicated.
Yeah, but like many things in Greek scholarship, you're talking about thousands of years of history here. All right, so let's get a little more into the dog whistles on that. So you're talking about the stress of like ethnic Greek this and ethnic Greek that. Where does some of that language come from?
Well, here's some. We have to get into Greek history, modern Greek history, to do that. If you don't mind my going on a tangent, because I plan to do this later on, but it works with the discussion here.
You are here to get on every tangent because my audience and I both want to have a better understanding of where these arguments are coming from and why there seems to be this seeming righteous superiority that a lot of these folks have when they get into fights, and why they've appropriated the language of oppression, like, for their arguments. Because there have been, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it, there have been colonizations of Greece several times. There's never been a full-blown Greek genocide, but there have been colonization attempts. There have been cleansings and mass migrations that have been forced from various territories that were classically belonged to various Greek settlements. There have been wars that have happened even within the last 300 years. So there is a claim to oppression within the last 300 years, technically, but it's a little bit different than you would find in other places. And so let's get a little bit of context for some of these nationalist movements and the sort of mythologized history that a lot of them preach.
Exactly. So as we probably all know, a very, very brief timeline of Greek history goes from ancient Greece, which is, Mycenaean, the Dark Ages, Archaic period, Classical Hellenistic, and then we basically lose the idea of an independent Greek settlements, the city-states, essentially. While there was the idea back then of a more or less homogeneous kind of identity in the sense of Hellenic meaning or pan-Hellenic meaning of all Greeks. Yes, a lot of the what we call ancient Greeks, the Athenians, the Spartans, and so on, did conceive of a sort of, yes, we all speak the same language with differences, we all worship the same gods to an extent, so we are the same people, sort of, but we are not united. They waged wars with each other. They were, quite frankly, divided. After the end of the Hellenistic era, and during the Hellenistic era, technically, the Romans conquered most of Greece, as we well know, and that's when something started changing in Greek identity. The idea of Roman being, for political and administrative reasons, being a unifying identity and label in ancient times. Everyone was a Roman citizen, not everyone, but most people would be Roman citizens to ensure that the empire and then republic and so on would remain, first republic, then empire, would remain united and have cohesion because of the sheer size of it. The Greeks, as we know, the Greek cultural influence altered the Roman Empire, and Greek as a language, skinny Greek, became lingua franca, a common tongue of the Roman Empire. And then we go into late antiquity and the division between the Western Roman Empire and the Eastern Roman Empire that we have come to term the Byzantine Empire, which is obviously not what they called themselves back then. They still call themselves Romans. It wasn't until, and by that time, Christianity had arisen and had dominated the scene. It became the main religion of the Roman Empire, and specifically the Byzantine Empire, the eastern part, which survived much longer and more cohesively than the West. The West broke up eventually to all these states that eventually turned into the European nations and countries we know of. The actual Eastern Roman Empire started. Actually, what I want to say was that the word Greek, the actual Greek word, which is Hellenas, became a term for it was the same term as the Latin-speaking Romans would use for pagan. Even to this day, the Orthodox Church has liturgical rites to curse and denounce the Greeks, the Hellenes.
Well, yeah, and there's even to this day, a division among certain aspects of the Greeks, because I touched on this a little bit in my video, Let's Go to Hell, Us, which was a lot of fun. I got a couple of things wrong in there. I didn't realize that Hellene was used as a modern ethnonym, which, I've changed my opinion a little bit about Hellenists using Hellene to refer to themselves, because I was informed by a good friend of mine who I met through the comment section and you that Hellene is an ethnonym, but there is also still major divisions between the previous term that was used, which I believe starts with an R, and Hellene. Like, sometimes using Hellene is still looked down in Romeos. It's still looked down upon in some spaces, even though the Greek, the actual Greek government, refers to citizens as Hellenes.
That's slightly inaccurate, if I may say so, in the sense that it hasn't been. Romeos is the Greekified version of Roman. Actually, it's what survived from the Byzantine Empire after its fall, and it's not. We only use it for folk mentions and folk. I don't mean this in the folkist sense. I mean it in the actual folklore, folk songs. Yeah, folk traditions, exactly. Like, for example, we may refer to Romeosini, which is equivalent to Hellenism in a sense, as in all of Greek identity and culture, but it has completely fallen out of use for anything outside celebrations and commemorations of old events. It was very active during the Revolution era in the 1800s, but not anymore. Now you will only find it in poems, or historic novels or things like that.
That's interesting because my other Greek friend who I was going to have on had mentioned that when she was younger, that there still were some debates going on, particularly in I think it was like the 40s, 50s, and 60s, which she's like her parents, I guess, talked about this, and there were still kind of debates in older spheres about Romeos versus Hellene, and Hellene was for a while almost pejorative. Like for a good chunk of Greek history, it was shameful to call yourself that. Like they would say, "No, I'm not a Hellene, I'm a Romeos."
Well, that might happen in certain regions. I would have to know where that friend and her parents were from, because certain regions were more hung up on particular terms than others. But Hellene hasn't been, it stopped being pejorative in the late days of the Byzantine Empire. Although back then it was still it wasn't popular, but it had stopped having that pagan association as strongly because it hadn't been around for so many centuries.
Well, and this is why these conversations are so important, because not any one Greek person is going to have the full Greek experience. There are certain rural areas in which certain things exist and certain prejudices and such exist that say might not in others.
Exactly. And I am sure there are a lot of divisions and issues within Greece, within Greek groups that I'm not either privy to or very familiar with, and I can only speak to them on a very surface and brief manner. If I may continue with the history thing, as we know, when the Byzantine Empire fell, and for a lot of places quite earlier actually than the actual fall of Constantinople, Greece was the Greek lands, because Greece wasn't a thing back then as a country, were conquered by the Ottoman Turks. And that lasted in some areas for up to 400 years or slightly more. Sorry. The thing is, it wasn't just that influence. It was the influence of the Ottoman Turks, which changed a lot of things. Even in our language, we have so many Turkish words left over. Our cuisine is largely Turkish, although a lot of Greeks will go crazy at that idea, even though everyone knows it. And
well, I mean, the cultural mixing and exchange that is caused by colonization will often continue to stay within a culture.
Yeah.
Like fry bread, for example, is an indigenous tradition that is a direct result of our colonization, right? Like we were given very small rations of water and flour when we were moved to areas where growing wheat and stuff was dang near impossible. And so we got very good at taking water, flour, and oil and making something edible out of it.
Yeah, colonized people will we are forced to find a way to, adapt. The thing is, there were, like in the chat, there were indeed Turkish populations and exchange and influence way earlier, indeed the Seljuk Turks, for example, but it's the Ottomans that actually conquered everything left of the Byzantine Empire and imposed that colonization until the 19th century. So I'm talking about Ottoman because that was the main cultural influence and the main colonizer in those centuries. The thing is, there was also the Italian influence of the Venetians, who had, if not conquered, then at least taken over and influenced places, especially the islands and the western parts of Greece, sometimes even reaching to Athens. We have Venetian era monuments and influences even here in Athens. The Greeks were colonized and they were well, I will say oppressed to an extent, but in truth, there was a far more complicated relationship with the Ottoman Empire. Oh, there we go. With the Ottoman Empire, during all these 4 centuries of history, obviously you cannot just simplify it over to, we hate the Turks, or the Turks hate us. Yeah, sorry. What I want to say is that ethnic identity changed in those times because people culturally maintained the idea of the Byzantine or Roman, Romios as the word is nowadays, remained for most of
Hey,
the
as long
Ottoman
as folks are
occupation.
being polite, they can have their arguments in the live chat. My mods will take care of anybody who isn't.
Okay. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. As I was saying,
you were
the
talking
ethnic
about the
identity.
complexity of like oppression dynamics within the empire.
Yeah. The ethnic identity changed because the Orthodox Church was the main source of cultural and educational influence in the conquered Greek lands for all those centuries. Not the myth idea of that, the Greeks were only literate thanks to the church. That isn't true, as we know from history. But it is true that the most literate members, in most cases, were either the upper classes of Greeks who had a relationship with the Ottoman Empire and usually had an administrative role, because the Ottoman Turks, being Muslim, had the idea that the people of the book, like the Christians, have certain privileges that they maintain, like they can keep their own religion, they can keep a level of
citizenship. In most countries under Sharia law, though significantly less so in the modern day, the concept of people of the book stated that Christians and Jewish folks, not so much Zoroastrians, despite the fact that sometimes they claim to come from the same sort of lineage, but Christians and Jewish people often are allowed certain privileges and rights that those of other pagan or polytheist or indigenous traditions would not get under those regimes.
Yeah, and it was also politically safe and useful for the Ottoman Empire to use, knowledgeable and capable Greeks to maintain control of the Greek lands that they held, it makes sense. It happens everywhere. The thing is, the identity that survived was the Roman Byzantine one, not the Hellenic, either as a term or as an idea. There was the idea of a unified nation of people like we are all, but the binding agent in that case was the religion, Orthodox Christianity, because that was the only thing that was left, because even the language changed in many cases. A lot of people were forced to learn or be taught or use Turkish because that was the language of the empire. The problem is, a lot of Greek, especially in the later years of the Ottoman Empire, when the revolution of the Greek people was in the works before it fully blossomed, it was the influence of it was really the influence of Greeks abroad who spearheaded the revolution and who organized the revolution. The Filiki Eteria, for example, a secret organization that, thanks to them, the revolution occurred and they organized the Greeks under Ottoman colonization, was made up largely from Greeks who were living abroad, Greeks who were educated, who had been influenced by the enlightenment of the European nations and countries, and they tried to bring that over here. And a way to do that, because the thing is, as I will actually agree with the comment in the chat that the Christian church, that actually what I was going to say now, is that for a lot of Greeks and the church at that time, the what's the word? Not the sorry, I'm missing the word. It's the Latin. Basically, the situation at hand was favorable. They had privileges. They had a good relationship, more or less, with the empire. It wasn't to the church's what's
It wasn't to the church's benefit to end that
benefit. Exactly.
collaboration.
Thank you. Exactly. It wasn't to the benefit because they had a lot of good relationship and a lot of well, it's the same problem that happens to traditionalists in any era, that the status quo, that's the term I was looking for earlier, is comfortable, and they don't want that to change. And the problem is,
well, I mean, monotheism tends to be extraordinarily beneficial for empire building in general because the focus is on, in most monotheist traditions, I exclude Judaism here because there isn't a focus on an afterlife, but in most Christian traditions and in most Islamic tradition, the focus is on the afterlife, not the now. You know,
exactly.
You have to live a good life for a positive reward. So it doesn't matter what's going on in the world around you to that much of an extent, because ultimately you're looking at that forward reward. So monotheism is extraordinarily good at ensuring cultural hegemony and the continuation of oppressive institution and empire, and even justifying that empire, as we saw with the colonization attempts here in America.
Exactly. And again, there is another comment that is true in the chat, that the church and the social and cultural situation in Greece at the time, like the 17th, 18th, 19th century, was highly hostile to Enlightenment ideas. We didn't have, as a people, we didn't have an Enlightenment period. We have one that we call Enlightenment, but that was totally in the literary and artistic currents. It wasn't social, it wasn't cultural. We never went through the secularization that most of Europe went through after the Enlightenment. So
one of the objections I've seen that seems to be credible is that the Orthodox Church is still far more involved in governance than anybody wants to admit.
And that is a direct product of that, of those processes in those eras, that religion became a identity binding agent, a core of an identity for people to band around at a time where literacy, education, and secularization never occurred. The problem is the Greeks abroad, who were highly educated, who were exposed to Enlightenment ideas and secularization and all these things, and who wanted to change the status quo of the Greeks and to create a modern Greek state liberated from colonization and independent for Greeks, they tried to, they saw that they could not find any camaraderie or any help in the church, who had the most power and influence at the time, or the high-ranking Greeks, who were usually in very good relationship with the church and the Ottoman Empire. So they had to go to the people. They had to influence and affect the people and cause them to rise up and revolt. And the way they tried to do that was by focusing on another aspect or another part of our history and of our shared cultural identity, as opposed to the religious one. And that's when Hellen came back into play. The idea that the ancient Greeks were and are our ancestors, and culturally at the very least, because the genetic idea was never a thing in those times. We didn't know about descent in that manner. So they really tried to focus on the ancient glorious past, in a sense, and try to use that as a basis for the new Greek state, culture, and nation. Because up to then, people just consider themselves Ottoman subjects. There was no concept of a nation in the sense of that happened far later in a retroactive myth of the national uprising. It wasn't. It took a very long time for the influence of a lot of Greeks of high education and high rank, not rank, high stature, to bring the people in towards that kind of idea. And even when Greece managed to revolt, and when and only because other countries basically recognized the budding Greek state, they managed to gain independence as a country and as a nation of people that could be together. The thing is, at first there was a huge divide within Greece, within the new Greece and the Greek people, between the faction that was very church influenced and the faction that was very European influenced. If in fact one of the most some of the very first constitutions we had in the modern Greek state was very progressive for its time, even to the point of freedom of religion, and they didn't really it didn't define Greek by the religion, which even to this day our constitution swears by the Orthodox dogma and considers it, until very recently at least, it was considered a essential and irreplaceable part of the Greek identity. Excuse me. That kind of division and the many wars, civil wars we have, caused a division that exists to this very day and a dissonance in Greek identity. And the reason why there is this, to return to the original point of the comment, the reason why so many Greeks seem to focus on the idea of the ethnos, the ethnic identity, the ethnic tradition, the ethnic religion, is because that was what was built up over all these decades and decades and practically centuries of effort from the Greeks to gain independence, because the country grew over time. We had to take back lands. The Turks, there was the Pontic genocide. We did overstep and we did cause a lot of problems with the Greek-Turkic War, where we essentially invaded Turkey and we ended up losing a lot of lands that we possessed. And multiculturalism at the time failed because, due to those wars, due to those distractions and those political missteps and mistakes on both sides, we had to do an exchange of populations in the early 20th century. Every Muslim in Greece was had to go over to Turkey, and every Greek from Orthodox specifically from Turkey was forced over to Greece. So we even lost any kind of multiculturalism we might have had at the time, which made the homogeneous idea of we are all the same even stronger. And that remains in the minds of a lot of people, and it remains in our educational system. It is very much systemic, like racism is systemic and colonization is systemic in the US country. And it's the same in Greece, and that's why we see so much in that comment, in so many other people's opinions, that everything is about the ethnos, the nation, even though that kind of belief and that kind of attitude is very modern and largely artificial.
So I would like to respond to one comment that we have there about when I said that there was no Greek genocide. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because you and I had this conversation where you said that you didn't feel as though there was a full Greek genocide in the sense of the way that it was with indigenous traditions, where they've attempted to completely eradicate us. There was a cultural shift and cultural mixing, but there's a distinct difference, I think, between those two things and the intentions of them. So do you want to go into that a little bit? Because you're the one who made that statement when we first started talking about this.
Yeah, indeed. That was another part I want to talk about. I thought we might bring it up later, but I can talk about that now if you want. There was genocide of the Pontic Greeks, of a specific cultural part and group within Greek culture as a whole in modern times. but that was when I said that there was no Greek genocide. I didn't say that exactly like you, as you put it. I said there was no widespread genocide, and that I meant specifically in comparison to the genocide inflicted to the indigenous people of in America, in the sense that the colonizers in the North, in the Americas, they actually destroyed everyone. They tried to stamp them out completely, and to this day they are denied. Indigenous people in America are denied their basic rights. They are denied their civic rights. They are denied their very land. Greeks don't. We may have been the weaker part of the equation. We may have been a very vulnerable state and still are, but we are independent, and we have been independent for nearly 200 years in growing levels, because at first Greece was just Peloponnese and Attica, but we have a place that is ours and that we control, and it's
the Greeks are in charge of Greece right now.
Exactly. And even before that, the Ottomans didn't kill every single one of us. They didn't try to completely erase us. And whether people like it or not, Christianity is a Greek, Orthodox Christianity is a Greek cultural element. Greece didn't stop and restart magically in late antiquity and in the modern times. We didn't use a time portal and bring over Hellenic culture from when it disappeared to us. And genocide is a very clear thing. Suppression, colonization, oppression, discrimination, persecution, all these things did happen and they are valid. But
genocide is the concentrated event to destroy a people from the ground up, culture, physically, everything. And cultural genocide, although it is a very real thing, and the Americas, it is still ongoing. Like, we could not speak our indigenous languages until the 1970s, for example. Most people don't know that. It was illegal for powwows to happen until the 1970s as well. And as I noted in my latest stream, talking about the bodies they've been finding under residential schools, children were still being taken away from their families by CPS and put in residential schools as recently as the early 2000s. And even to this day, Native American children are taken from our families at a rate 50 to 70% higher than the general population, because a lot of us are lighter skinned and white couples like to adopt lighter skinned children. Like, that is something that they do to us.
Yeah. Exactly. That's not something that happens here or happened here at any point. And that is another problem. Why well-meaning foreign people our misunderstanding is that they project American terminology and American issues on other countries, especially Europe, in this specific situation, Greece. We cannot talk about the same things. They're not equivalent. They are similar. They are analogous to an extent, but we cannot talk about, and we cannot equate what indigenous people in America went through and still go through with what Greeks went through. Because from the very beginning, and I will stress that again and again, no matter how much people disagree with it, the idea of a united ethnos, a nation of people, yes, not a country or a state or something political, but as a culture, is very, very new. It, as I said in the very beginning, it existed to an extent in ancient Greece as a unifying idea on a very surface level, because they still had wars with each other. They still hated each other in many cases. They only recognized that we worship the same gods and speak the same language with differences. They didn't think we are all absolutely the same people and we can never, and we have to be all together. That took a long time to happen. Even Alexander's empire failed in that and broke up. That's the thing. The idea of a perfect ethnos, a perfect ethnic identity that is completely accepted and understood and real, didn't exist. It is
Well,
actually...
and it's also important to note that when you're talking about Christianity, because this is something also that I think Greek people don't like to admit, but Christianity is a combination of Jewish and Greek syncretism. There are uniquely Greek ideas that are present within Christianity, which is why a lot of, at least modern Christianity, at least the way that the church evolved, it started as a messianic Jewish cultus. However, Paul and those like him and his followers began proselytizing to Greeks using Greek ideas, using Roman ideas. Those two things, they're together. Like you see references to Tartaros in the New Testament if you read it in Koine. Like there's a syncretism there, and Orthodox Christianity has syncretism with ancient Greek religion as well.
Indeed, because things are far more complicated than people try to separate them. They are not black and white. The thing is, yes, Christianity is syncretic. Orthodox Christianity is syncretic, but it has been very much the same for a very long time, and it no longer has those kinds of major influences, in the sense that it has built its own theology for so many centuries now, and its own ideas, and it specifically decries any the polytheistic elements. When they say Hellenic, they still mean polytheistic, while in most modern Greeks' mind, Hellenic is cultural. It's not about, and even when we say Hellenic polytheism, Hellenic gods, we don't mean that the gods are ethnically Greek. That's ahistorical completely, because everyone at that time was free to worship these gods in different ways, and that's why a lot of ancient writers would go over to other lands and say, "Oh, Melkart, the Phoenician god. Oh, this is like that's like a Phoenician Heracles, or I don't know,
Greco-Buddhism.
Yeah, Greco-Buddhism, exactly, which I know almost nothing about, which unfortunately, there are so many things you can study, but syncretism.
There's also North African syncretism. In my video, What to Do and Myth Contradict, I talked about the beliefs in some North African countries that had Greek colonies and other like folks that adopted a lot of Greek deities even long after the Greeks no longer colonized there. There was this belief that because of both of their associations with horses, Athena's father was Poseidon, which is extremely interesting, like just from an anthropological point of view. But it shows that syncretism was widespread.
Exactly, and there is no historical basis on the idea that only Greeks, or that Greeks have an authority or a precedence when it comes to the gods. It's simply, in these lands, these people came in contact with these gods, and they named them, and they gave them epithets and traditions and all that. It has nothing to do with who owns these gods or who has precedence or authority over these gods. Because whether we like it or not, and even if that was a thing, which it wasn't, it doesn't exist anymore. And we cannot just revive a non-existent or an imaginary idea of, oh, the Greeks are the guardians of a Hellenic pantheon and of Hellenic polytheistic religion. And even if we were, the way most Greeks culturally will understand Hellenism is as something open to anyone. You don't have to give up your prior what's the word? Your prior culture. You don't have to. You can be Hellenic in religion, especially in the modern times when we have very specific political and social divides between borders, identities, countries. It's we cannot talk about a national religion, an ethnic religion, when these things are very differently treated and understood today. We cannot just say it's the same thing. The Greek state, in one of the very few cases where I agree with the Greek government, told to the YSE organization when they applied with a new law for legal recognition of their group as a religious organization of the religion itself. We cannot, in 2015, and there is a statement by YSE about that, in a very hostile language, denouncing it. You cannot use a term that has long since been changed in a way that you understand it and expect that to be accepted and made the default for everyone. Because YSE tried to lobby the Greek, register their religion, this polytheistic religion, as ethnic Hellenic religion. And the government's response was, this will cause confusion, and this will make no sense to most people, because ethnic and Hellenic are something very much different. You cannot say this is the ethnic religion, which in modern terms means the national, the state religion, and say this is the religion of Greece. It's the same problem. Why? It's like doing the same thing that we accuse the Orthodox Church of doing, imposing their identity as the sole defining factor of Greek identity. Like you have to, and that is how a lot of people think about it, that you have to be Greek and Orthodox. I even have personal experiences of being discriminated against because I am not Christian Orthodox.
Well, and I want to make a quick apology. I didn't realize that there was a genocide of the Pontic Greeks when we were first discussing it. Like, I had to get up to go get some water in the middle of your discussion, so I might have missed it. But when I said that there wasn't a genocide, what I meant was that it was not the same sort of genocide that is still currently being perpetuated, and that these traditions were not closed, even when they were a part of ethnic identity, which is why I was talking about, when you're talking about appropriation is specifically closed traditions that are a part of a currently oppressed or genocided groups, a person, like a group from which that genocide is ongoing, and a group from which they are oppressed currently by a culture that is defining their culture for them. And that is not the case in Greece. These were not closed traditions, even in ancient times. Maybe something like the Eleusinian Mysteries would be, but most of the practices that we are talking about in a revivalist movement, most of the texts that we were using were widely available. They were reproduced over a long period of time. The practices themselves, many of them had largely died out apart from Christian syncretism, specifically within the Orthodox Church. And even arguments that they were continued within family lines is not the same thing as an oppressed, specifically minority, like, say, the Haida culture, where we do not define who we are. Scholars generally do. Like, we are not, like, if somebody takes, say, Haida artwork and sells it, there's nothing that we can do about that.
Yeah,
right?
you know,
and, like, we are not in charge of a Haida nation. There is a nominal idea of one, but if you have ever watched any of my streams on the way that Indigenous relations work with both US and Canada, our Indigenous traditions, our so-called governance, are the way the reservation system works. We do not have near as much autonomy as the idea of the Haida nation would give you. We don't have our own country. We don't have nearly the level of rulership that one would expect. We can't even prosecute citizens of the United States that are not members of our nations that commit murders and things on our lands. We have to that we have to deal with the US government in that regard. Like, their, money is basically not provided for infrastructure. People on reservations don't even have addresses. In, I believe it was like North Carolina, they actually tried, it was either North or South Carolina, tried to strip voting rights from Indigenous peoples, like, on those grounds, because most of us that live on reservations have PO boxes and not actual street addresses. And so they tried to make it illegal to vote with only a PO box, to cut off the Indigenous vote, because there was a chance that one particular political party would succeed with the Indigenous vote. So when you're talking about that, I wasn't trying to downplay the genocide. What I was trying to talk about is the distinction between cultural appropriation of a closed tradition with which we do not have power versus what is going on in Greece, which is that the culture has shifted. It has changed. It is no longer defined by many of those things. That heritage is there, and I will acknowledge that heritage is there. Greek people are Greeks, but those traditions were not closed in the first place.
Yeah, that's the thing. And closed means is understood differently. And there is a problem that a lot of people will bring up the not a lot of people, I mean a lot of people who are of a nationalist influence, even if they don't consider themselves to be ethnicist or nationalist, is that, and that's what I was talking online about, how insidious Greek nationalism is and how it pervades and permeates everything in our culture and education. And uh, a, a lot of this rhetoric and a lot of these ideas were born in defense of Greece as people, as country, as culture, because exactly we've been through a very tumultuous past. We've had wars until very recently. Uh, Greece had a dictatorship that ended in the 70s. The United States have never had a dictator, an actual coup d'etat and a dictatorship. We have a very different social and cultural and political background, and we, as a people, we tend to be sensitive and defensive, and that breeds nationalist rhetoric because it mirrors that defensive mechanism, that the healthy patriotic element, and they go too far and they turn it into something exclusionary. And the thing is, in Greek thought, in modern Greek thought, in the arts, the higher education, literary currents, there is a saying that you're not born a Greek, you are made one. And national rhetoric has taken and reversed that into you are not made a Greek, you are born one, which is insane because Hellenic identity was understood as something, especially in antiquity, as something centering on religion, and less so on religion, because that's another point I will explain. It was mainly a thing of language. Those who spoke Greek were Greek. They may not have been Athenians, they may not have been indigenous Spartans or Corinthians or anything, but they could still worship, they could still have their own, if they were foreigners, their own gods and the Greek ones. And Greeks went, if the Hellenic religion was only for indigenous, Greeks, we wouldn't have colonies with Hellenic gods, with syncretisms. The highly syncretic form of Artemis in Ephesus, the highly syncretic forms of Celto-Greek gods in Malaysia, not Malaysia, sorry, Massalia and Spanish areas, the North African syncretisms that you mentioned, and the overall Greek, Roman, Egyptian syncretic traditions of the Hellenistic and Roman and late antiquity periods. It's religion in pre-Christian times was not understood as a monolithic, centralized organization. It wasn't something there was any kind of authority about. The Athenians would never say they would say, this is what we do here in Athens. And if you're part of Athens and you're following the laws and customs of Athens, you have to do things this way. That doesn't make it closed, because Athena was never just an Athenian deity, or however else you want to speak about that. That's why even in modern times, people revived the Olympic Games with the same idea of a unifying, even though that's not what it is anymore, as a unifying, not organization, a unifying method to bring people together. It's not about, oh, you are not ethnically Greek, or because that doesn't, that's artificial, that's very recent. And if we are to talk about appropriation and oppression in Greece, we have to talk about the oppression the Greek state and modern Greek culture do, and the erasure they cause on ethnic minorities. The Greek Muslims of Thrace are in walled-off communities, and they are only given certain privileges of easier access to higher education, for example, but they are deeply oppressed and discriminated against. surviving ethnic minorities that are Greco, whatever that particular minority is, the Roma, the the Chacones, the Vlachi, the I think it's Sephardiotes, the Greek Jews. All of these people, they are not legally recognized. They are not culturally recognized. They are oppressed. These people can very much talk about appropriation because we have taken their languages, their dialects, their traditions, and we have destroyed a lot of their unique elements. But Greece in general, Greeks in general, Greek culture in general, it's not oppressed in the same way, or it cannot be appropriated against. We freely sell everything. It's
So I'm going to pause you really, really fast to address something in the chat. The way that pagan is defined on this channel is specifically those who identify as such. If people don't identify themselves as pagans, then it is perfectly fine for them to say that they do not identify as pagans. So chat, if you guys are being grumpy about that, if somebody doesn't identify as a pagan, they're not a pagan. They might be a polytheist, but they're not. So be nice. That said, I do want to talk a little bit about the terms Hellenism, Hellene, and ethnonyms, because there is a major rift, I think, here. And I talked a little bit about in my video, Let's Go to Hellas, but as you just provided a massive amount of education, and as I've learned more things from my other friends in Greece who I've been talking with for quite some time, there's a lot of complication around that. Hellenism in the US, in the West specifically, has a different meaning than Hellenismos does in Greek. When you say that those things are equivalent, they are not. At least in terms of when you have that conversation here. And I know that you and I have a little bit of a disagreement on like what there is to do about this problem, which we can talk about because, again, this isn't an echo chamber. We can have a disagreement. Exactly. But Hellenism here had a particular meaning in scholarship. Specifically, it dealt primarily with the religious aspects of like so-called Greco-Roman culture. Now, granted, Hellenism as a term in scholarship has fallen out of favor in the past 50 years, but it was adopted by the polytheist community in the 70s and the 80s in the United States as meaning those who revive the Greek gods, especially 90s and early 2000s was when you started to see it proliferated with organizations like Hellenion. So the problem with saying that Hellenism is using an ethnonym in this context is twofold. The first, Hellene in English has primarily referred to, or at least Hellenism has primarily referred to in ancient times, the religion of ancient Greece. So it being adopted as part of a revivalist movement, Hellene in that context is referring to the origins of the Greek gods, not to the people that worship them as being Greek. We do not claim to be Greeks. And I denounce those who claim to be direct inheritors of the tradition, quote unquote, over Greeks, who say that the Greeks no longer have any stake in it whatsoever. I did not say that in my political video. I talked about the problems in Greek polytheist movements, but I have Chelydoreus here who is specifically reviving and creating a modern mystery tradition in Greece. To this day, I'm expressing my full-blown support for him and that project and others that are not focused and not exclusionary of those who would practice other traditions of Hellenism in a pluralistic sense from Greece. I have no problem with Greeks. What I have a problem with is nationalism, ethno-nationalism, the sheer amount of abuse that folks, some of which are in this chat, have perpetuated on people like me and Chelydoreus and other friends of mine in this community and former friends in this community that had to flee because of doxing that was perpetuated by some of these groups. I don't know who specifically did that in that case, but I know for a fact that it was involved with that harassment. I have a problem with that. I do not have a problem with Greek people. I am not anti-Greek. I have a problem with folkism. And I would like to have you kind of talk a little bit about your opinions on that, because I know that you tend to adopt the term Hellenic polytheist for much the same reason. But to me, Hellenism and Hellenismos are not the same thing because of the way that that word has operated in English specifically.
Okay. I'm fully happy to do that, but I do have to make
you're going to get one warning. Do not harass my guest. If you insult or harass my guest, I will ban you. And that is caretaking my community. I told you if you're polite, you can be here. If you're not, I will kick you out of my stream. That is my right. My mods will take care of you.
And just to make it clear to people from my perspective, that's exactly what I would say. I would ask you to give him a warning at the very least. People who might think, what he told Chelydoreus isn't offensive, knowing, having gone through that harassment but not just yesterday, but in previous months, I know the background of these kinds of talks, so thank you for the warning, and I hope we can continue in a civil manner. The thing, to talk about our disagreement and the terms Hellenism, and so forth, I understand where you're coming from, and like I said earlier, terms change, and different places will use terms in different ways. Just like you said, in international communities, Hellenism is equivalent to ancient Greek religion or Hellenic polytheism. But my disagreement, or what I'm trying to say here is that we Greeks, we actively call ourselves Hellenes, and our culture and our nation Hellenic and Hellenism. Hellenism and Hellenism is the same word, as I've said before, in just different pronunciations and languages. It's not like Hellenist and Hellenic or Hellene. There are the differences. I have no problem with people calling themselves Hellenists, because even in Greek, Hellenistis, it's more of an adjective, or an adjective turned noun, really, which is similar to Philhellene, friend of the Greeks, friend of the Greek culture and of the Greek nation, and it's fine for me to use it as a term for the religious practitioner, because it's not the same as calling yourself. For example, it's like calling yourself British. When British people are still around, they may not be oppressed, they may not be appropriated, but they still use that as a name for themselves actively. And Hellenic people, Greek people, Hellenists, use those names for themselves. It's not so. In my opinion, an ethnonymic use of a term trumps that of the comfort of a foreign country or group of people who are used to a term, just like people are used to racist or terms or slurs, but we are very well aware that these no longer fly, because we know that they are highly offensive. Not to say that using Hellene is offensive, but it feels like an attempt to identify with the country, exactly because in many cases, Hellene and Hellenic, and even legally, it refers to Greeks, very much so, and the Greek country and the Greek nationality and the Greek culture.
Well, and this is part of why I've discouraged people to use the term Hellene to refer to themselves if they are Hellenists, because Hellenist is the acceptable term. I think the difficulty, though, when you're talking about, say, Hellenic polytheism, is that, or Greek polytheism, which is an alternative that has been proposed, is, for one thing, Folkists have fought against those terms as well, for the exact same reasons, because there's an ethnonym. But also, Hellenism, having been the common term, denotes a specific set of traditions and has a revivalist context, as we've talked about, whereas Hellenic polytheist might not. And Greek polytheist can refer to a polytheist from Greece, or somebody who worships the Greek gods, or even, say, a magic practitioner who, considers their work to be working with the Greek gods and has no revivalist concept whatsoever. So when it comes to parlance, the widespread adoption of the term for as many decades as it's been going on is the reason why I tend to use the term Hellenism specifically for my own practice.
And I do not dispute that, nor do I have a problem with it. I don't mind the use of Hellenism for that, exactly because even as a cultural term, it is more overarching than Hellene specifically, because all of them can be considered ethnic terms, but here's the thing: Hellenic, the adjective can refer to anything that has any connection to Greek things. The Hellenic gods, the Hellenic religion, the Hellenic lands, the Hellenic products. It's not that they're not ethnic in the sense that we own them culturally, but we don't have to limit it to someone who is foreign, but very much so not ethnically Greek, I mean, but very much so worshipping these gods that were found and described in those particular ancient cultures that united under the name Hellenic. That's my thing. I don't mind Hellenism. I don't use it for myself because I am Greek, because I'm a Hellene, and because it confuses myself essentially when I have to say, oh, Hellenism, the religion. Oh, I'm not talking to a polytheist or a pagan, so I have to say Hellenism, the Greek culture. It's confusing for me. I don't mind people using that. I specifically try to avoid the word Greek to refer to religious matters because for me, in English parlance, is the ethnonym most people know. Like if I say the Greek people, I mean modern Hellenists, but I'm not going to say, or the ancient Greeks. I usually say, for example, the ancient Greek religion, but I will say Hellenic polytheism to refer to the modern revivals.
Well, and that's part of why I don't use Greek polytheism or Greek religion generally to refer to my stuff, because to me that is the ethnonym in English. That is how we refer to people from Greece. In Greek, it is Hellene and Hellenismos, and so I understand how that can feel as though it's a dispute between the two. You talked about how also you tend to use Hellenic polytheist because what you are doing is not a strict revival or reconstruction. It is a founding of a new mystery tradition.
Exactly. And for the longest time, I used to utilize the term Neo-Hellenic for my own practices because I'm very aware and very transparent on the fact that they're not reconstructionist. They are revivalist on the extent of reviving the spirit of an, they deal with Hellenic gods, so they are Hellenic to an extent. But I know that even revivalists can get confused with reconstruction because revival is, bringing something back to life. But I dropped that term because I don't only honor and worship Greek gods. I don't only follow Greek traditions and Greek or Hellenic, more accurately, practices. I'm also a witch. I also do witchcraft. I also do other things. So for me, it felt inaccurate and limiting to just say Hellenic or Neo-Hellenic because I'm a modern Greek. We even say that nowadays, although it has taken a sort of pejorative element to it. It's, for me, these terms are all a little complicated because the history is complicated. English uses a different term for us, while Greek uses the same, but then religions and religious practitioners and academics might use the English form of the ethnonym, so it can get confusing. I don't mind people using whatever term feels best to them. I do have a problem with Hellene, as you have said for yourself as well, but I don't mind Hellenism. I just won't use it myself, and even when discussing with someone who uses it, I will continue saying Hellenic polytheism.
Well, and that makes perfect sense because, again, there's a distinct difference. There's a linguistic barrier. And the term Greek does come from Latin initially. So I understand why Greeks adopted their own language, their own ethnic term in their own language when they refounded their country. It makes a lot of sense that it would be confusing. But for us, because of the fact that the Latin is what made it into our language, Hellenic honors to me, the origins of that tradition, Hellenism, Hellenic gods, the Greek gods, while distinguishing it from the Greek people, the ethnonyms being Greek and Greece.
Yeah, that's why I don't have a problem in English. What I do have a problem in both languages, both Greek and English, is the attachment of ethnic to either of these, whether you say Greek or Hellenic. Using the word ethnic is a red flag for me, because first of all, it comes from the Christian idea of the ethne, the meaning the nations of polytheists, the pagans, the idolaters, so forth.
Which itself comes from the Jewish idea that each of the nations had their head gods, which you see repeatedly in the Torah.
Exactly, it's a holdover, and then something they have changed over time in their theology, because Christians were also in the beginning very against the Hebrewising of Christianity. I've studied in my theology studies in university. We went very much in some courses, very much into the early theological problems of the Christians and how they fought against.
I completely agree. By the way, Velin, this is where when you get into languages, this is where stuff gets complicated.
Exactly. It's complicated even in your own language, and then you have to translate things over to someone else who has a different background, and it gets messy.
Well, and a lot of the historical stuff that you went over is very hard to find unless you're doing a classical studies degree or something along the lines over here, like Greek history. America, especially, like significantly less so in the wider parts of Europe, but America and Canada, it is damn hard to find history, like world history after, say, the 14 and 1500s. Anywhere that isn't here. Like there's this very America centric thing, and so you have to really dig to find a lot of this information. And even then, trying to grasp the complex politics of another place and why certain things mean what they do, a lot of that information is locked behind a linguistic barrier. And so unless you're already bilingual, it's going to be hard to find a lot of that information, which is why these sorts of conversations on a friendly level are important for these things. But I don't think that that's a reason to bar the use of a term from an entire group, which is what I've noticed a lot of the folks that harass both of us seem to want.
Exactly. And it's the problem. That's another problem with nationalists and ethnicists and all those people who attack, not just us, but everyone they don't agree with or like. First of all, they move goalposts, as we say. They change. They evade questions. They will change their rhetoric. They will change their ideas. They will say one thing in the next, and then immediately deny it and say the opposite thing afterwards. It's how to explain more. It's why I keep saying that Greek nationalism is insidious, because it uses, like we were going to say, it uses progressive terminology like appropriation and colonization to refer to something that isn't or can't be appropriated and isn't colonized anymore. There are lingering colonization influences and in Greece, exactly because these things don't disappear after even hundreds of years easily. But it's not as simple as just saying, we deny people. It's not the same as in other countries. And another problem, even the use of these progressive terms come from an American perspective. It's what I was saying earlier about the projection of certain people. Well-meaning Americans who are practitioners, who are polytheists, who are worshippers of the gods, get caught into the trap of, we have to be mindful of appropriation, and there are Greek people saying, you're appropriating our traditions, even though these traditions are long dead. And the new ones are completely new. It's one of the reasons why, as you saw in the Polytheism conference we were part of recently, there is such a recent drive and push to not reclaim but build new things and innovate and grow polytheistic communities and revive polytheism. Because as I tried to say in my presentation then, the Greek, the modern traditions are artificial in their origin, because we have very fragmentary information, even for something like Hellenic, the ancient Greek religion, because we have mostly Athenian sources, but even they are, in
Incomplete.
pieces.
Like, we're
Yeah,
missing,
incomplete.
for example, Heracles, we know from ancient sources, had entire epic cycles of his own, and the Iliad and the Odyssey are both like both of those are part of a larger cycle that Homer would have written multiple pieces for, but we only have those bits surviving. And for Heracles, despite the fact that he was so widely worshipped and probably the most famous of all of the heroes across all of the Greek city-states, he is shown up more and more often. We have only references to his epic cycle. We have no surviving copies of any parts of it.
Exactly. And what we have that has survived, we have to think about how much of those survivals were by chance, how much they were about certain popularities, like how much can we say that the mythic cycles that we have were as what's the word as predominant or as influential. We know about Hesiod, for example, because of and Homer, because of all these references. But what we also know, and why I'm so against mythic literalism and the focus on mythology in modern polytheism, is that the mythology is a very surface level thing, and the actual religion at the time, the practice, the beliefs, we don't know a lot of the beliefs. We know, and I don't mean that in a doctrinal way.
We know what a lot of rich writers wrote about them, and
exactly, we know a particular perspective, and seeing even comparing with modern history, we know exactly how what's the word focused people can be on one particular perspective or one particular thing, and they can build up something that, I mean, we know, for example, that Plato had a lot of opinions about a lot of things, and those colored his understanding and his interpretation of even traditions of his era and day. So we cannot really say that we have a perfect revival or something that we could argue it has to be preserved against appropriation, when it's literally people all over the world trying their best to piece together a huge mess of broken information, have to interpret everything through the long-standing Christian and atheist bias of academia, which has been a problem until very, very recently in academic works. And you can still see it. You can still see that it's one of the reasons why my work is towards theology, focused on theology, because I want to interpret the ancient religion for modern polytheists theologically from modern eyes, and not in a Christian or atheist through a Christian or atheist lens, or secular perhaps more than atheist, because we see
well,
it so
yeah,
often.
and I mean, I even talked about bias in scholarship. Like, I have a video and a live stream where I talked about somebody who got their degree in the classics, where we talked about the bias found in scholarship. Scholars are excellent sources for coming to and beginning to learn how to interpret things better than we could as lay people, just coming to mythology, they can see things that we can't because of the breadth of their knowledge, but that doesn't necessarily mean that their work doesn't suffer from bias. Especially in the past 10 to 15 years, scholarship has moved away from the pro-Christian and anti sort of religious bias towards, for example, one of my favorite works, Smoke Signals for the Gods by F.S. Neiden, the attempt to acknowledge the agency that the gods were said to play in Greek religion rather than trying to strip it as previous scholarship often had. Movements like what Edward Butler has been doing in Platonic studies to acknowledge the polytheist and polycentric views in Platonism rather than trying to reduce it to monotheism as many scholars have in the past. That doesn't necessarily mean that scholarship is all we need in order to found modern traditions. And I personally believe that the harassment, and no, for those to reply in the chat, it has not just been criticism, it has been outright harassment. I have had my weight and appearance attacked. I have had my orientation and gender identity attacked. I have had my work that I have created attacked. I blocked all of the accounts for the people who were doing that sort of harassment and attacking, and new accounts were created specifically to harass me. I have been threatened with legal action. I have been threatened with doxing. I have had vague threats of violence sent to me. in DMs and other places. I'm not accusing specifically the people in this chat of all of those things, though I know some of them definitely I have screen caps of. It is absolutely
Same.
harassment. And the thing is all I have done specifically was criticize an article that was posted, report on screen caps and things that I received from friends who received similar treatment, and talk about wanting to revive a tradition of Hellenism, specifically the worship of the Greek gods, wanting to revive a tradition using the best information that we have for people who want to ground their worship in history, because that's what makes them comfortable. I have never claimed to be the inheritor of a tradition. I have never claimed that I am the only voice in Hellenism. What I have said is that I speak against a lot of the things that have been said against me. I speak against the exclusionary rhetoric of you must like drop your entire culture and your entire worldview in order to practice. If that is the way that you want to do it for your tradition that you are a part of, then go for it. But don't tell people that they cannot worship the gods in an authentic way, that what they are doing is not a form of Hellenism, when even in ancient times, there was a plurality of traditions across Greece and outside of it.
Yeah, exactly. And
what I'm trying to do is provide a pathway for my audience and for folks that find this find that they need that sort of historical grounding. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to say that you cannot do what you are doing. I'm saying that I disagree with you and I will stand against that. But I'm not saying that you absolutely cannot do it. What I'm saying is it's not very helpful for the continuation of your tradition, and it's exclusionary and abusive. And I absolutely will say that. 100%.
And I want to say the same, because just yesterday I was attacked and harassed and there are screen caps and those tweets are still up because Twitter refuses to take them down for violating their terms of service, even though some of them are extremely offensive. I've had people, some of them in this, who have invaded this particular interview and chat, and have actually, they have referred to me with feminine pronouns as if that somehow degrades me, which shows their misogyny and transphobic remarks. They have attacked my work, my writing. They have degraded that. They have degraded attacked my appearance, my name, I have been called a traitor. I have been called.
You've been misgendered.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. They keep misgendering me, and they keep talking about me with feminine pronouns, as if, because to their eyes, and some of these people are self-proclaimed gay people. Make it make sense. I've been attacked over and over. I was attacked months ago when we first met, because I voiced my problems and experiences with the YSCE, and I have done that for years and years and years. I've never hidden it, and I was also attacked very recently, and I also have all of these people blocked. But some of my followers, because I assume they saw it from likes and retweets or something, they brought it to my attention, which generally I hate, because when I block someone, I don't want to deal with them again. But when it was brought to my attention, and I saw that people mutuals still follow these people, and perhaps they are not aware of these people's behavior, I brought it into public attention, and I said, this is how people treat me. And I was continuously attacked. Both of us, I haven't been attacked online as much as you have, Alekai, but we have both been attacked over and over again. I freely admit and say that in Greece, I'm blacklisted by a lot of the main groups, exactly because I am hated for my homosexuality, for my practice of witchcraft and magic very prominently.
Even though Greece absolutely had an indigenous magic tradition, even before the Hellenistic era syncretism.
And still has. Magic is still very much a part of folk and popular religion, folk religion.
Absolutely. And
We have
the
a
reason I brought
treasure
that up
trove.
is because when they're talking about appropriating practices, they're talking about, ancient practices, some of which are said to continue to the modern day. Even back in ancient times, there was a strong tradition of folk magic among the Greeks. Like, we find so much evidence of that. Not all of it was written down because it didn't become popular among rich people until the Hellenistic era. But in terms of the wider Greek populace, we have evidence going all the way back to the archaic period of things like katadesmoi, curse tablets, there things like certain kinds of pottery that were used as magical implements, amulets and such. So when we're talking about this sort of thing, when we're talking about the level of harassment, when we're talking about the abuse that we both have suffered for being open, I guess, critics of that sort of ideology, when I'm talking about things like folkism, I'm saying that I will not stand with folkist rhetoric. And folkist rhetoric includes rhetoric that privileges a particular ethnic group within a religious framework.
Exactly.
And that is why I criticize Greek folkism. And I always will continue to criticize Greek folkism. But that doesn't necessarily mean the fact that I'm criticizing them does not stop them from continuing to practice, from their organizations from continuing to exist. I might have a loud voice within the Hellenic community because, like, let's face it, when you're talking about the Hellenic polytheist community, there aren't a lot of channels that are nearly as big as mine, right? There aren't a lot of people that are nearly as well known because of the fact that I work my ass off and I built this channel from the ground up. Because of the fact that I offer this for free, because I work as hard as I do on my videos, because I cite my sources, because of the fact that the video format is the most accessible, and because of the fact that I've been doing it for over a year now, because I have tried my best to be as inclusive as possible. And that's why my community is big. I don't tolerate folkism in my community. If they want to have their own communities, there's nothing that I can do as a content creator to stop them. I am doing nothing to oppress these people by criticizing their ideas. And I will continue to stand on that. And I'm also going to state, for all of the constant demands of coming onto this channel, I do not have to platform your focused ideas. This is my channel, and just like I said in my video on politics, why I talk about the things I do, I am not going to platform focused ideas ever. I won't. I have engaged with the comment that was left, which we barely got into because there was so much to explain. I engaged with the comments that was left. We engage regularly in my Discord community with those comments. I tried to engage in meaningful dialogue on Twitter and got threatened with lawsuits and abused with horrendous abuse, and was then told also that I was a coward for blocking the people who were being abusive. I do not owe you discourse. I don't.
Yeah.
My community does not owe you discourse for your bad ideas. And that needs to be okay. If you are so threatened by me and my community, then why don't you go build one that's better instead of harassing us for having our spaces, for founding our traditions? Hellenian calls their work Hellenist. They call their religion Hellenism. Same as the YSE, same as Labris. And I will continue to stand for inclusion in my own community and in the wider community in which I have a voice. I will continue to stand against folkist and exclusionary, ethnicist, and nationalist ideas for as long as I exist in this community. And if you do not like that, if you think that your way is better, then go do things your way and see how it turns out for you. See how long your tradition lasts. Do the work yourself, instead of coming after me and Chelydoreus and other people like us that are trying to create our own pockets. There was a pluralism in ancient times. Now, I do not think that folkist traditions have a validity to them for those arguments, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you do. If you believe your tradition has validity, work in your own house. Put out your own work. Stop trying to hurt those of us who are doing something different, because I am founding my own tradition. Common Hellenism, the book that I'm going to be putting out, I hope will be a tradition for folks in the West who want to honor the Greek gods in a historically grounded way. It is a revivalist tradition that is unique to me and my community, born from my practice and my research. It is its own tradition. That is why I call myself a common Hellenist. It's why the name for my, playlist for all of the Greek stuff that I've done, all of the research, all the historical research, all of the citations, everything is under a thing called Common Hellenism. That is the project I'm working on. I'm working on the Common Hellenism calendar. I'm not saying that mine is the only Hellenism, and I have never claimed that. And the second you accuse me of that, you can folk off.
Agreed. Really, I could not agree more. And honestly, I don't care for apologies that are for appearance's sake or from people who have been so extremely offensive and hostile against me and others like me, because, well, I frankly do not care about an apology from people who, it's like, sorry, I'm affected by all this, and I struggle to put my thoughts into proper expression. As you said, we do not owe anyone discourse, and we do not owe anyone space, really. You are free to believe and do whatever you want. We have neither Aliakai nor me nor anyone else have any right to control how you call yourselves or what you do, as long as you don't actively harm people. And a lot of these people harm others through hostility, through attacks and offensive terminology and vocabulary and language. And that's the difference. That's what I wanted to say actually when I messaged you yesterday and said I had second thoughts about doing this interview, exactly because of all the harassment, because I knew it would bring more harassment. And the thing is, like I said on Twitter, after you said so yourself, I refuse to deal with this anymore. And I've only dealt with this when it has come up and involved me. Like, I talked about YC when I saw people start talking very positively about them, and I was like, they still do all the things they said all these years ago, all these discriminatory things, all this offensive and racist language and approach. They are still very hostile and polemic towards anyone who isn't them, and it's obvious by their public statements as an organization. I spoke to that because I saw it, and because people asked me about that. I was actively tagged and called to say, oh, we know you have, hey, Chelydoreus, there are people talking about YC, and we know you have an experience. Or yesterday, I brought it up because someone attacked me without having interacted with them for months. They are blocked. It's different to attack people. It's different to talk about people or interact and then be criticized or anything. I don't have a problem with the disagreements. I might personally choose who to associate with for my own personal reasons and ethical, factors. But like, we may disagree on some things, and it's fine because your type of polytheism and Hellenism is different from mine, and that's fine. But that's a thing. We can hold community and space together. We can collaborate. We can discuss politely, in peace, and in mutual respect. And that's not what all these people give to us. I refuse to talk to someone who goes behind my back, but publicly, because they know I might see it in some manner, and they call me a liar, a traitor to my nation. They, they misgender me.
Because that's not red flag language in and of itself, right?
Exactly. It's like, how can I trust a person like that, even if they do apologize, or even if they try to, extend a welcoming hand? How can I feel safe? And how can I feel comfortable that this won't repeat? Because I've seen this happen all the time. It's not about this. I've disagreed and argued intensely with so many people over the years, with all kinds of traditions and with all kinds of, citizens of all kinds of nations and countries. It's not about disagreement or argument. It's about outright hatred, offensiveness, rudeness, and attack. It's different. I understand getting upset and calling someone a liar, for example, if you feel personally attacked by the things they say or misrepresented. But when the other person explains and says, no, that's not how it is, that's not what I'm trying to say, and you don't control the narrative, no one does, and these people then magnify their attacks and magnify their and exaggerate their harassment, I have no time for this. This is literally the last time I will deal with this, because as I wanted to say to you yesterday, but I decided to keep it for the interview itself, I want to engage, and I have wanted to engage in constructive work for years now.
Exactly.
And why I say my work, it's for anyone interested. It might not be for everyone, and that's fine. Just like other people's work isn't for me. I don't feel comfortable or belonging in reconstruction, rigidly
Revivalist.
reconstructionist. Yeah, and even in some
Revivalist and
revivalist
recon
spaces.
communities. Because let's face it,
Yeah.
every single revivalist, every single reconstructionist is a revivalist. There are some things we will never be able to reconstruct. We can't reconstruct the culture from which these religions came from. So like that dichotomy is a false one. Go on.
Yeah, and I know we have said not to bother about the chat, but because we are talking about the harassment and all these things, when people, like we see in the comment in the chat right now, try to say, oh, we are sorry, let's talk, give us the space to talk if you are actually, egalitarian and all that, and then immediately say things like, oh, but I guess that's how you get people for your Patreon. And if you are going to degrade my work and to degrade the way I try to do things, and you confirm again and again that you have fully adapted and taken on the Greek patriarchal culture and the Greek bullshit that comes with it, then I have nothing to say to you. Absolutely nothing. And I refuse to talk about with these people because they don't matter in my work and in my space. And let's face it, if I'm going to be very honest about it, I'm in Greece. They are not. They can folk off, as you said. They don't affect me.
Hey, can we get an F in the chat for folkism, please? Like, folkism can folk off. And for those of you who have access to the no xenia for xenophobes, go ahead and post that as well for those of the channel members that are hanging out here. Look, guys, if you don't want to be called a folkist, don't use folkist rhetoric. If you don't want to be called a nationalist, don't use nationalist rhetoric. If you don't want to be called out for harassing people, stop harassing people. If you want people to stay in their lanes, stay in yours. If you want to ensure the future of your tradition, work on that. Focus on your piety. Focus on your work with your gods in your traditions. Spread the word for your work. Don't harass other people who are doing the same. Because it's not a lie. If you're being called a folkist, maybe you need to take a look at why. Self-reflection is essential. The ancient Stoic philosophers in particular, of which we are both fans, I know, stated that self-reflection is essential to identifying virtue and vice. I would highly suggest you look very carefully at yourself if you want to stop the criticism that you are a folkist. And I'm not talking directly to just the one person in my chat. I'm talking to the army of folkists that I know go after me on this channel for criticizing their ideas. Because I get them from heathenry, I get them from Hellenism. I've even gotten Kemetic folkists in my comments telling me that I'm a race traitor to my own traditions, that I should drink from my own well. I was told, is hated tradition not enough for you? Guess what? I practice both. I practice the revive Hellenism that I am building from the ground up with my community, and I practice the traditional height of faith as I was taught. You can practice both as a multi-traditionalist, or if you were a syncretist. I'm not sure how compatible the two are, but if somebody wanted to try it and they were trained as I was, go for it. There's a multitude, a plurality of approaches to the gods. I will not worship alongside a folkist. I never will. I will not accept them into my own community. Go build a community of your own. I will still speak out against your rhetoric because that's what I'm going to do. But here's the thing. If you don't bother me in my community with your rhetoric, you're not going to give me a reason to criticize you. If you don't harass me and attack me, you're not going to give me a reason to bring your butt up. If you're not trying to create articles and things to tell people they cannot call themselves Hellenists or say they practice Hellenism, that only ethnic Greeks get to define that, if you are not creating that content and putting it out into the world, you are not giving me a reason to bother you. If you're not coming into my threads insulting me, you're not giving me a reason to talk about you. But guess what? Even if you keep doing that, I'm not going to talk about you anymore, at least not for some time, because I'm done. Your BS, your Folkis BS, is a distraction to the work that the gods have tasked me with. I have so many projects that I'm doing that I am working morning until night. And my friends, Chelydoreus, you can actually attest to this because you have seen pictures of the stuff that I am making and the things that I'm working on. You know more than most, even some than patrons of the stuff, because I send it to you constantly, because we are both in the process of building traditions. And with that out of the way, I will let you give a concluding statement to the Folkism section. And even though we are over time for 2 hours, I want you to get to end this on a positive note and to talk about your incredible work reviving mystery traditions with the grant that you received from CG Pit and with the support of your patrons, because there is nothing wrong with receiving community support for your work. That doesn't make it quote unquote about the money. My patrons can tell you how they had to bully me into making a Patreon. You had a similar experience. That doesn't mean that it's about the money, but needing money to pay your bills and eat and not die in order to focus on your work is not the same thing as trying to take advantage of a group of people. That's not the same thing. It's not being profit-minded. Needing compensation so I can pay my artist for the calendar project is not money grubbing. There should be no shame with earning a living off of the things that you love, any different than the shaming of artists. My friend Tamasu, who's coming on next week, and we'll talk about that during the shill portion, has gotten hate for charging as much as he does for his incredible work. His icons are gilded in gold. He opens the mouth, so to speak, with ancient tools that were made by specific artisans, ceremonies that are a mix of his revealed religion from his experience and ancient Kemetic traditions. These are living icons, and he has been criticized for not giving away gold gilded, hard fought icons to anybody that wants them for free. There is something wrong with that. There is a puritanical, Christianized mindset to that. There is absolutely nothing wrong with earning a living. That does not mean that your work is about the money. My work is not about the money. It is about the love of the gods. If the money were to dry up, I would not be able to do as much of it because I would have to focus on other things. But I would keep doing the work that I'm doing because I love my gods. Because Athena called me to this work. And I think, Chelydoreus, I think you're the same way. So I'm going to let you close the section on Folkism so we can talk about that incredible work, because let's end this on a positive fucking note.
Agreed. And honestly, we wouldn't have had this particular topic to discuss if it wasn't brought up to our faces every single time. And honestly, like you said, making a living, doing what we love, doing writing, doing community work, doing religious work, that is valid, that is legitimate. No one can, and anyone who says otherwise has to really reflect on their conceptions of work, employment, egalitarianism, and so many other things, because that's what I want to say. That's what I keep saying, rather, about Greek nationalism. It's so ingrained in Greek mindset, in Greek culture, in even people who I wouldn't call them folkists, I wouldn't call them nationalists. They might still use at least some of that rhetoric because it's everywhere. It's like we said, it's systemic, and you cannot just completely make a systemic problem disappear. Because it by default it is everywhere. And since our modern societies are structured in such a way that we cannot just take off, go to an island, and make our own communities, we have to work and live and exist within these systems. We are forced, just like we are forced to make a living monetarily because we live in capitalist societies. We still have to make to try and fix things from the inside, because there is no other way in modern societies. What I want to say to end all this is that folkism and nationalism is a very difficult thing to do, and Greeks specifically have a huge amount of work culturally and socially ahead of us. We have even in matters like gender issues, sexualities, equal rights for minorities. We have so much to go through. I wouldn't say we are behind specifically, because it's more complex than that, but Greece has a lot of things to work through, both as a country and as a nation. And what I can do and what I want to do is make a space internationally, exactly because I have been disappointed and rejected again and again and again, and not always respectfully, because I fully understand and accept people being like, you know what, you don't fit with us. That's fine. I don't expect anyone to just hand me acceptance, and in their own communities, I mean. But in my personal experience, Greece doesn't have what it takes for my kinds of communities and spaces. Maybe it will in the future. Maybe I just haven't found the right people yet. But after 16 years, I'm really tired of trying. So I have turned all my focus to the international community, because I have always found wonderful people throughout, excuse me, throughout a variety of traditions. And for me, the important thing that I want to reiterate.
Sorry if you guys can hear my kitty, by the way. She's diabetic and she's been because she's not feeling so well after she got her shots. She was being loud as shit right next to the mic, so I didn't know if you guys could hear it.
I can't hear anything, but
go on.
Cute kitty. I don't mind disagreement. I don't mind different approaches, even within the same overarching tradition, or religion rather, because, like we said, pluralism, polycentricity, variety, diversity, these are essential to polytheism, and they are essential to most societies before certain mindsets became predominant. It's like what Butler tries to say with polytheism. It's always going to be plural. There is no central authority. There is no authority other than the one we make within specific demonstrated spaces.
Well, and this is why I don't claim to be an authority on Hellenism. I create work on it, and I have a very loud voice in the community, but I am not the authority. There are many others like Fel the Blythe who are attempting to create traditions and educate people and make things accessible as well. The blog Bearing the Aegis is another example. There's a plurality of these things, and we need that.
Yeah, and people are free to do what they want, and they're free to disagree. I know people don't like me doing magic, and they have been respectful about that. Even that has happened. I've had polytheists, not, Greek or Hellenic ones, who are like, you know what, that's not what we don't have a good opinion of magic. That's not how we define or approach it in our own community. And that is completely fine. I don't expect everyone to agree with me. I just want people to leave me alone and not attack me. And if you agree with me, come and share space. If you disagree with me, but you still want to share space, you're again welcome. If you disagree with me and you want to attack me, that's when I draw the line. And the problem with Greek mindset that is so affected by nationalism is that this separation of space doesn't work. It doesn't apply to the minds of many people. It's a cultural and social problem I have as a Greek, that I keep saying people are so invasive in Greece, because that's how the culture and the society has grown, where everyone feels and acts entitled to your space, to your life, to your opinion and approach. To the
fruits of your labor.
Exactly. And if you don't like what my labor is, don't support it. If you don't like, and I don't even mind people telling others, you know what, I don't support this particular person, and I find them counter to my own beliefs in our own community, please don't support them if you support us. I'm fine even with that, because that's not an attack. An attack is tearing people down about their appearance, about their gender, about their sexuality, about their way about their work. And yes, it is work. And some people might have an anti-work sentiment or a hate or a misunderstanding approach in what constitutes work and what constitutes labor. But
It can take me upwards of 40 hours to make a well-researched video. Like, it has
you.
taken me longer than that to do some of the research. Like, I have done easier topics during some weeks, like the politics and Hellenism video, which was not an easy topic by any means, but you were there as I worked on that script. Chelydoreus was kind enough to help me review that script along with Tomasu and a couple of other friends before I put that public. You've seen the level of labor that goes into even just something that simple where I don't have to do a buttload of research. I've spent literally the past 2 months researching politics in ancient Hellenic Athenian religion specifically, just to try to start on something like that. And that is every moment of my spare time. I will get into the freaking jet bath and read scholarly stuff in order to, like, and I cite maybe half of what I read because the stuff that I find the most pertinent, the original sources that are cited by older things, I'll go back and back and back until I can find the things that are most accurate. That takes a fuck of a lot of work. It can take me upwards of 10 hours to record and fully edit a video. Just that process, not even the script writing and research. Like, being compensated for that by my patrons, which is done willingly and I pressure nobody to do. You ever wanted, like, you want somebody to accuse me of being in it for the money? Talk to my patrons. They will laugh in your face because I actively yell at them in patron chat for giving me money, for donating, for, like, being kind to me. I have a hard time accepting that. I yell at my community regularly for that.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked to be more accepting of all that again, because I made the Patreon last May because I've taken years, even though I could have made a Patreon for so many things and so many projects much earlier. I felt I don't know enough. I'm not experienced enough. There are so many better people out there than me, and I also know that the kind of work I do, the innovative, reviving aspect, the building new traditions, building new projects, that can easily be misinterpreted and misunderstood as fraudulent work. Like I'm trying to, bring people into delusions and have them elevate me as some sort of high priest of excellence, but.
I mean, literally, the thumbnail for my priesthood video says I'm not a priest on it, and so does the actual, like, tag that I have in my Discord server, because I got sick of people calling me that. Yeah, I'm not a priest, I'm an educator.
I haven't... I only very recently I started warming up to the word priest again, because I do a lot more work that I personally define as priestly, maintenance work that can be... I call it like temple work, but I don't have an actual temple due to space restrictions, but I do have permanent altars, permanent shrines, permanent work that I have to do all the time. And building a mystery tradition means
you
that
are
I have
going to be the high priest of your mystery tradition when you build it, whereas mine is geared towards
solitary. Yeah, I'm not going to call myself that, and that's what I wanted to say about the actual my project and the work itself.
Thank you, Russ. Final note on the folkism topic, because you were kind of meandering towards a conclusion. I'm going to repeat the final line from Declaration 127. If the folkists want to carry on their beliefs, and this is a paraphrase, then they're welcome to stand, but they stand alone. I will not stand with folkists. I will not engage in their rhetoric. I won't argue with them anymore. I have put out there everything that I possibly can about how those beliefs limit the agency of the gods. Ultimately, even when you try to couch it in culture and you try to gatekeep names and terms for traditions, go build a tradition that lasts yourself, by yourself, and leave me and my community out of it.
Yeah. And one very small addition from my part to that, because I agree wholeheartedly. It doesn't matter what other people call themselves, as long as what you do is constructive. It's like I'm even if I disagree with you, if we can find common ground on when it comes to the worship and honor of the gods and not our egos and our whatever, then we can stand together. And that's basically it.
All right, so let's talk about your incredible like work that you do, because you do a lot of historical articles and a lot of articles on various topics on your Patreon as well. And I've seen some of the stuff that you've done on that because we've talked about it. But you're also working on this new initiatory book for a new but still grounded in some revived and historical things. So this is a mystery tradition that is entirely original for modern consideration, but has some revivalist elements to it, as you've explained it to me. Let's talk about that, because you've talked about it may not be for everyone, but anyone can access it when you're done with the work that you're currently doing.
Exactly. What I'm building is tentatively called the new mysteries of Hecate Despina. It's you can call it the Hecatean tradition if you want, because I do have a primary devotion to Hecate, and I am part of that kind of community. But I call it a mystery tradition, a mystery cult, because the main idea is the experience of the mysteries of the gods and helping. Yeah, sorry.
Well, directly, like the idea is the experience of those mysteries, both through the process that you are being taught, which you are going through yourself.
Yeah, because I tried to be a reconstructionist polytheist for many years. I tried to be a more eclectic polytheist, and while I still worship and honor the gods in basic ways as well as more advanced ones, I always felt that something was missing, and that something I found it in more magical and occult-oriented traditions. The idea of mystery, of mysticism, of something beyond just honoring and celebrating the gods, but going through a indescribable process where you can feel even closer to the gods, not in a hubristic or authoritative way, but simply as an experience, because that's my main point that I keep saying.
It's a different layer to religion, which this is why we talk so much about plurality and pluralism and why they're essential, because for some folks, for example, there's a Thomas who has a book coming out as well talking about the initiation that he underwent. There's a work that I'm going to be doing next year that is secret. It is at present, I am not at liberty to reveal it, but as of starting June next year, I'm going to be starting a process of my own that is going to be essential. I'm not founding a mystery tradition or anything, but I do have a personal project that I'm going to be doing that will result in something for the community. Like, there are multiple paths to getting closer to the gods. Some people find integrating devotional offerings into their daily lives are very, very helpful, like we've talked about on previous streams that I've done. Things like votive offerings, creating that sort of record of the beautiful experience between yourself and the gods, like on your altar. But there's also, initiatory traditions and initiatory experiences, which are a backbone of Hellenic religion. Things like the Eleusinian mysteries, for example, were their own tradition in, both independent and integrated into Athenian religion. And they were like, people would come from all over ancient Greece to pay almost half a year's salary in order to witness this initiatory thing that we know very little about because it was kept a secret.
Yeah, and that's the thing, because at least from my perspective, I feel that it's a sad part that is something that is sadly lacking in Hellenic polytheism today, the mystical aspect, the mystery aspect. And I wanted to do that within the overarching umbrella of Hellenic polytheism, because for me, these gods are the point, the most important thing, the goal. And
we are here because we love the gods.
Exactly. And why I could very easily attempt to find personal mystical fulfillment in other traditions who have an active mystical and mystery and initiatory element and current, that wasn't enough for me, and that wasn't what I wanted, because the Hellenic gods are the main gods I worship. Hecate is my primary goddess, the one I worship first and foremost, and to whom I am devoted. My work and my duty is to her and to these gods first and foremost. So
not just because of any sort of heritage or something in the Folkist sense, but because those are the gods that you feel the closest to. Those are the ones that you feel called you.
And why I have no problem saying that some of that calling might be due to heritage, but that's just for me personally. That's not a defining trait of this calling or of these gods. They can
It's not
call
required.
anyone. Yes, it's just what, just like people. I mean, I like learning more about my heritage, where my descent is from. My name is Chelydoreus is a tribute to one of my places of descent in Peloponnese, and that is closely tied to Hermes. It's actually where, according to myth, Hermes found the tortoise who he used to make the lyre. So calling myself Chelydoreus, the name of the mountain and of the village from which I hail, is important to me, but that doesn't mean I am some sort of Hermes vessel or authority or high priest. It's just
You
a
were called to
personal
do a
connection.
particular kind of work by the gods that you worship, the same as I was.
Exactly. And the funny thing about this mystery project, the book and the mystery tradition within it, is that it didn't start from me or as a project for the community. It started as a very personal devotional work where Hecate herself gave me guidance and instructions in the sense of do this and this and these things, and that she's meant to be syncretized with Despina. And I had to look all that up because I only knew of Despina as an epithet for certain goddesses like Hecate, not as a goddess of her own. And it took a lot of work and a lot of study to learn about the Arcadian cults, the connections to the Messenian religion, and so many other things. And eventually it became, from a very personal devotional work, it became an outright project that, thanks to the center's, to Dr. Butler's work, I had an option, an opportunity rather, to make it something bigger. Because, like you said, we would still do this work regardless of financial support, because this is our religious and spiritual duty to ourselves and to our gods and to our communities. But as having the support with the fellowship grant, with Patreon, with in general people's support, I'm able to make it bigger and to make it into something that is meant to be shared and something that is meant to be accessible. And that's why I'm writing a book, and I'm not saying, oh, come to Greece so I can initiate you.
Well, and that's where you were talking about, I believe, induction as opposed to initiation. We had some questions about that.
Yeah.
Would you like to explain the difference between those two things?
Well, I took the terms I talked with the person who coined them specifically in this manner, Sam Block, or Polyphanes, from the Digital Ambler blog. He's well known in the Hermetic community and in, that specifically in the Hermetic community. He's a very knowledgeable person and an excellent friend and an excellent individual. And he wanted to differentiate between initiation and induction, or rather, the initiation that happens in human groups in person, and the initiation that is conferred by gods and spirits, because he's also part of an initiatory tradition. He's a priest of Santeria, so he has a very first-hand knowledge and experience of what it is to be part of a closed initiatory practice. And he wanted to differentiate between, we both hate the term self-initiation because it's a misnomer, and you cannot initiate yourself in a closed tradition. It doesn't work like that. But what happens when something does have the transformative element of initiation, that which is conferred by gods and spirits, but lacks the closed practice aspect that requires the physical initiation, the group initiation, the exclusive membership? And that's induction. Induction is what the gods and the spirits do to you. They bring you into their mysteries. They induct you into their mysteries. They open up this wonderful world of their powers and their domains and their glory, for lack of a better term, and it's not something that can be put into word because it's a mystery, not because it's secret, but because it's by default ineffable. I cannot explain how that experience takes place because it's not something I can simply describe with words and physical characteristics.
Any more than one of us who has had a divine experience could possibly explain the feeling of awe. I tried to characterize it once as feeling like you were standing over the edge of the Grand Canyon, looking back through history at the great roaring river that made it, while still also understanding the fear of standing right there on the edge. But even that, but you'd have to take that and multiply it by thousands. And when you try to think back at the memory of it, you can feel the hollowness of it, the incredible depth of what you held, and how your memory cannot contain it.
Exactly. And you cannot make anyone understand that and experience that first without having them go through that actual experience. And obviously, we cannot
what you're trying to do is create a framework for people to go through that experience in a similar way to the way you did.
Precisely. And that's why I try to I want it to be simple. I don't want to be overly, ceremonial or anything. I cannot help but have a degree of in my magical aspects, my magical practices influencing the way I treat all this. And also because the way I understand things, because this is meant to be, not meant, but structured so that individuals can go through it on their own, because we don't have the priest, the procession, the entire experience. I had to find a way for someone on their own individually to do that effectively. And so I wouldn't say just magical in the overarching sense, but theurgic, hieratic, the kind of magic that priests and mystics used in antiquity. That's the kind of magical influence that exists in this mystery tradition, because you need a way to replicate powers and influences that we, all of us, lack. We don't have an initiated priest. We don't have sacred artifacts. We don't have sacred temples. We have to recreate all of these sacred spaces and all of these powers and energies, for lack of a better word, to approach the gods and their mystery. And for me, because anyone can have a mystical experience with the gods at any time. It's completely up to the gods. You cannot control that, and that's why these kinds of traditions like mine can fail, in the sense that if someone isn't actually called, they probably won't even make it to the end. But you cannot force an experience. You can only guide people down a similar path to yours and hope that the gods respond to that and give them a similar experience. And exactly because I cannot have the authoritative nature of a local organized tradition, something with a group where I could actively teach people this system and this practice, I make it. My intent is to make it open-ended, in the sense that the Mysteries of Hecate Despina, the book, will be the basis.
It will be a foundation. It'll be a foundation for somebody to establish a practice using similar methods to what you did, but ultimately what they build is going to be built together with the gods in much the same way that ancient traditions were said to have been bestowed upon the ancient peoples by the gods.
Exactly. And it is my hope that it will actually inspire multiple branches, because I want to do that on my own as well. I want to take it towards the kind of path and destination I see, but I do not expect that to be the same for everyone. And I want people to have, first and foremost, I want people to experience the mysteries of Hecate Despina. I want them to know intimately this goddess, and then wherever she guides them, I hope they can go that way. I am guided towards a very specific way, and I hope in direction, and I wish, and I hope more people are interested, and I want to do that. Then I want to help them and so that we can build something together. But there is going to be a sole authoritative tradition, like, oh, only those following Chelydoreus's teachings are true. But anyone who adapts that book, that's why I'm making it a book. I cannot control who reads it and how they apply it.
Well, and that's exactly the same way that I feel about Common Hellenism, is I'm helping to build a revivalist basis tradition for people to then build their own practices. And, you know, theology, like my book is not going to include theology either, because people are going to be able to build their own. Some people might follow the praxis of Common Hellenism and be Platonists. You know, it's going to be between them and the gods. I want to take a quick pause and read 2 super chats we got. Ikeda Hakubi, Channel Sugar Daddy, says, just in time, you have our love and support. May Athena smite all your haters with the truth hammer. Hey, look, their belief is between them and the gods. Ultimately, whether the gods are pleased with them or not will be evident over time. And Child of Nick says, because both of you do wonderful work. $10 super chat. Thank you guys so much. So we talked at length before about the difference between a closed mystery tradition and a more open sort of induction-oriented mystery tradition like this. Do you want to talk a little bit about the work that you do on your Patreon and any sort of upcoming things that you have going on? Because you said that there wasn't as much to say about it yet, apart from the inspiration for it currently, because your book is still ongoing. You just got your grant a few months ago, and you've been actively working on going through the process yourself, so there's not a lot you can talk to about that yet until it's out, correct?
Exactly, yes. It's not because it's secret, but mostly as a spoiler alert, I guess, because as I said, a lot of this all of it is in progress, and I have seen things change over time, because something that originally worked for me might not work for many other people, and I want it to be accessible. So and going through each stage in this process, the ritual stages, I get more clarity for what comes next. So while I could write, for example, for the last stage, right now I haven't still gone through it yet, because it will happen in December. That's when the ritual date is. Then I will know much more, and I will have a complete picture, and I will be able to work much faster and much more concretely. Now I can only work with the things I have already done, and I don't want to spoil it for people or cause misunderstandings or preconceptions before they actually get the completed work, because things may change. Well, not the main parts, obviously, but I don't want to confuse people with details that may be omitted in the future or added elsewhere.
So do you want to talk about what you're currently doing in your Patreon and such to help support this work?
Exactly. What I'm doing on my Patreon is less historical and more from my own perspective and my own theological understanding, because something that will be apparent in the Mysteries book, as is apparent in my Patreon work, is doing polytheistic theology, really, and interpreting established concepts like the nymphs or priesthood or any kind of religious concepts you can imagine, how that can be understood from my perspective, so that my work can be more understood and clarified, and also how it can help other people. Like I write a lot of prayers to accompany. For example, I had a series of posts recently about epithets of Hecate, and I include prayers for each particular aspect and epithet, which I have found useful in my own practice. Not as because I firmly believe that we can be innovative and we can develop our traditions and our religion. We don't have to rely only on the Orphic hymns, for example, great as they may be, and I use them constantly. I want there to be more. And because a lot of people don't feel confident or capable, because everyone is talented and skilled in different ways, to do that, I want to provide a version, something like, if my prayers and my hymns and my writings help you, use them. And I want that to be, that's what I do through Patreon, really. I write articles and I write short essays examining existing concepts, from a particular theologian and practitioner's point of view, hoping that it will align with others or that will inspire others to forge their own understandings, because that's how I got where I am, by reading people's experiences, reading people's interpretations, and adjusting things accordingly and understanding things in my own way.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Which is, again, very similar to my own approach in my own work. All of my videos are meant to be jumping off points, either for further research or to help ground a practice in tradition so that one can feel confident in then building one's own relationship of Charis with the gods.
Exactly.
So with that in mind, guys, Chelydoreus's link tree is in the description. So everywhere that you can follow him and contact him and everything is in there. If you guys want to go check all of his work, most of his stuff is behind a Patreon, but his Patreon rates are really reasonable. Check him out if you're interested in the work that he's doing. I'm highly encouraging folks to check out a wide variety of pluralistic traditions. He's very clearly not trying to be a cult leader, as many people were concerned when I first brought up the idea of closed traditions and mystery traditions. So if you guys are interested in checking his work out, he's a very good friend of mine. I highly recommend checking him out. On my end, as far as stuff that I'm working on and what I would like to announce, so I'm not sure if I'm going to get it done by Thursday, just because I've had so many things, particularly the calendar project, taking up my time as of late. But the big thing that I've been working on is doing a different sort of video this year for Thanksgiving. I'm pretty sure it's going to be edited, but I might do a live stream instead, talking about 7 Indigenous figures from history that fought heavily for Indigenous rights or otherwise made an important impact in Indigenous history in America and Canada. There's a couple of Canadian figures in there as well as North American. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my ancestor Sky and his cycles of mythology and the people who recorded them verbatim and why that's so important to Haida history. So we can talk a little bit about that in the future. Again, I'm not sure if it's going to be a live stream or edited, but I'm leaning towards edited right now just because it might end up coming out a little bit later than Thanksgiving, and I want to make sure that I do a really good job on it. The other big thing is Patamasu, my friend who is a Kemetic iconographer, who is branching out into doing iconography from other groups as well, from what I understand, is going to be coming on to the channel next Monday at 6 p.m. Pacific time to talk about art as a conversation with the divine and how art becomes a way to relate to the divine in all aspects that is accessible to anyone. We're going to be touching on everything from the artistic payment issue that we had talked about that I had a Twitter rant on recently to the sort of theological basis in both Kemetic and Hellenist theology that gives rise to the idea that art is a continuous conversation between us and the divine, and the idea of theological and artistic ecstasy and how those things are interrelated and how that can help us deepen our connections with the gods no matter our skill levels, and why art is something that is beautiful and should be honored by the community and individually as well. So if you guys are interested in that, Damasu will be on my channel next week at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern to talk about that for probably an hour or two. It won't go as long as this did. We got distracted by the chat.
Yeah.
But I want to thank you guys all so much. Chelydoreus, do you have any sort of parting thoughts you would like to give the audience before we close up?
Not as much thoughts as much as, and because we got distracted and we digressed a lot, but that was honestly the nature of the topic anyway. We knew things would, and they didn't get as out of hand as I feared. I know we, especially me personally, I didn't get to answer a number of questions and a number of things, so I'm open to, on my social media, for anyone to ask any kind of question they had in Aliakai's server as well, because since I'm recently became a member. And I just want to say, right now, a lot of my work might be behind a paywall in the sense of Patreon, but that is temporary. I have a lot of projects in mind. I just that the book takes so much time that I can barely keep up, and I give precedence to my patrons simply because their support helps so much. I do appreciate everyone's support. Aliakai's friendship is invaluable, and thank you all so much for the great discussion, for the support and the defending us against the Folkies, because I did see it in the chat and people are amazing for that. And thank you, Aliakai, so much for having me over and for your friendship and for your help. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for your friendship and support. You've been there for me in some really, really rough times, and we've had some incredible conversations. I was so excited to have you on, and I hope that we can do this again sometime to talk about more positive things than just ethno-nationalism. This is something that was bothering both of us, and I really appreciate your perspective as a Greek person, bringing needed cultural context to a lot of these arguments and historical context, and also still standing with those of us who say that Folkis can stand alone. That means a lot to all of us, I'm sure. And just so you guys know, the conversation will be continued in the video discussion section of my Discord. There's already a conversation that's been ongoing there throughout the whole stream from a number of folks. There's some discussion questions that I posted as a sort of guidepost. You can check them in the pins. Even those who are new to the server can participate in those discussions, but if you're abusive, my mod teams are swift with the ban hammer and completely unforgiving towards, again, specifically certain kinds of rhetoric. Read the rules, check it. We're willing to have discussions, but if you want to be an asshole, go do it somewhere else. But Chelydoreus is a member of the Discord server, and I know that he's been pretty dang active in all of the discussions that relate to his work. So if you have further questions, we will both be there. We'll both get back to you as quickly as we possibly can. We're both pretty dang active in those spaces. As always, thank you guys so much for listening. This was a really long one. 40 of you guys stuck all the way out until the end. 3 freaking hours, an extra hour longer than I told Chelydoreus these streams usually go. It is probably my longest stream to date, but it was such a complex topic, and I'm so glad we covered it so thoroughly. As I've said many, many times, may the cycle of reciprocities between us always remain positive. We're stronger together.